"Hit it!" came a cry as I stepped into the darkened room. The voice was desperate, but my attention was elsewhere. The call of my friend's room defied the summer heat which seared the arid town where we lived. Even in the darkened room, models were visible, strung from the ceiling by fishing wire. Luke's X-Wing, S-foils locked in attack formation. Han's YT-1300 Corellian light freighter, replete with movie-authentic battle damage. Boba Fett's heavily modified fire spray, a dark pachyderm to greet visitors as they entered. Deeper in the room hung other familiar silhouettes. My friend and his brother were kindred spirits. This room was their temple. "Hit it again!" The urgency was followed by a choked gurgle. I rushed to the CRT monitor which my friend was angled into. A schoolmate stood over him, hand poised over the keyboard. He tapped a key and a soothing noise played, but the gurgling continued. "You've only got 2 Bacta tanks left," schoolmate said, his brow furrowed, eyes wide and locked on the monitor. Bacta? I knew what that was. "I know," my friend said. On screen, Kyle Katarn was drowning in a large pool which I later recognized as the aqueducts on Sulon. This was my introduction to Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, and I was immediately hooked. The lightsaber in Kyle's hand teased all manner of possibilities. I couldn't believe that I was seeing one in a video game, that we could play a venerable Jedi on a swashbuckling adventure. My friend hadn't been joking. The Jedi game was real. Friend and fellow YouTuber, High Functioning Medium, is riding shotgun in this analysis. His introduction to Jedi Knight feels similar to my own. Over to you, mate.
There is no more important series to my gaming life than Dark Forces. While I only dabbled in the original game, 9-year-old me finding Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 in 1998 changed my life. Previously, I'd only played Amazon or Oregon Trail, or dabbled in educational games like Math or Reading Blaster, but Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 hooked me on quote-unquote grown-up games or serious action games, with its faithful presentation and feel and emphasis on intense action and storytelling. On a small screen PC in my best friend's house, we played his older brother's copy of the game while he was taking a break and got quickly swept away in the classic feeling of it all. Our hero, Kyle Katarn, shows up at a cantina that's blasting away the familiar jingle jangle we know from the movies. Or however it goes. From this opening skirmish, Kyle would grow in Force sensitivity and become a Jedi, marking something of a first for Star Wars games in that we got to see a much more political and everyman type of perspective balloon into that of fighting Jedi is bent on unlocking ancient power and becoming nearly undefeatable. And let's not forget the absolute smattering of badass Force powers, from increased speed to push to healing to the powers we all really wanted to use like grip, lightning, or destruction blasts. All of it was just so pitch perfect, so faithful and yet so confident in its own beats.
Yep, he felt it too. The Star Wars movies captured my imagination, but the novels were the vehicle which transported me to a galaxy far, far away. The extended universe, committed to print by minds like Timothy Zahn and Kevin J. Anderson, fueled a passion for Star Wars that was insatiable. The EU birthed characters now famous in Star Wars lore. Grand Admiral Thrawn, Exar Kun, Kip Duran, Hussein Iceheart Izzard, Talon Card, and of course, Kyle Katarn and Mara Jade. I read over 30 Star Wars novels in a relatively short time, absorbing every character and scrap of lore. Jedi Knight was the culmination of many daydreams come true for a young Star Wars fan. The excitement among my friends was a feverish phenomena which couldn't extend beyond our group. This was a different time. Star Wars wasn't as prolific or widely embraced as it is today. Admitting that you loved Star Wars was grounds for a trip to the school toilet block, upside down and head first. While you were there, you'd likely hear a Dungeons & Dragons apologist getting similar treatment in the adjacent stall. Back then, geek culture was underground by necessity. Jedi Knight broke ground by being among the wave of new games to take advantage of hardware acceleration, a blazing new technology at the time that now seems as far removed from modern gaming as dinosaurs are to evolution. It also broke a 14-year drought of Star Wars full-motion video scenes, the first meaningful Jedi footage to appear since Return of the Jedi. EA and Disney have tried to break this record in recent years by starving fans of worthy franchise content. EA failed many years short with the release of the well-received Jedi Fallen Order and have since abandoned their attempt. But Disney remain undeterred by their churn. Good on you, champ. There's more to Jedi Knight than technical and cultural milestones. Much of the modern commentary on Jedi Knight misunderstands its best elements, glosses over them like they're a Wikipedia footnote, or omits them. In this video, I'll examine the elements of Jedi Knight which made it a critical success, and state why it deserves recognition as a classic, not only among the FPS genre, but among the broader industry.
Join me, and together...
Join me, dear viewer. Let's discover why Jedi Knight was, and still is, a game worthy of remembrance and an install in current year. A quick disclaimer. The footage throughout the Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 portion of the video is taken from 2 playthroughs. The dark side run used the base game characters and textures, while the light side run used a HD mod. Don't be too shocked when the footage changes quality. I'll cover the HD mod later in the video. This is an analysis of Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 and Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith. I stress this because I've caught flack for talking at length about pixels and polygons and shadows. That's what an analysis does. It analyzes the pieces to divine the whole and lend fresh perspective and a greater appreciation to these games. I hope. Welcome to the conversation. I confess, I hadn't heard the hype surrounding Jedi Knight before its release. Our family computer was the venerable Apple Power Mac, but my Nintendo 64 was the gaming workhorse. The infamous white powder collected around the base of the joystick was testament to that. Some of it was ground plastic, too. In short, I was a console gamer and lived vicariously through my friend who was able to keep up with PC technology and its mortgage-inducing costs. The initial promise of Jedi Dreams came when he rushed up to me one day and blurted out how cool the Jedi game was. Star Wars was niche back then, but it wasn't a tiny following. Star Wars comics had been around since A New Hope in the 70s, with a brief break in the early 90s. The movies replayed frequently on TV, alluring more people to the galaxy far, far away. George Lucas announced in 1993 his intention to create a prequel trilogy to the original movies, which rippled outward as an undercurrent of restless fan energy. This energy had to be directed somewhere. Novels appeared in the early 90s and did a fantastic job building upon the legacy of iconic Star Wars characters as they pursued new adventure and met fresh perils. Star Wars lore exploded exponentially with new heroes, villains, locations, and events. The Star Wars universe bustled with narrative possibility. Readers delighted at the new stories, and the medium brought a fresh wave of fans to the franchise. The Star Wars zeitgeist had begun, and it grew rapidly. Star Wars games released on many platforms, dating as far back as 1982. Some were great. Some even featured a pixelated Luke Skywalker with pixelated lightsaber in hand, if you squinted hard enough, but none scratched that infuriating itch of what it was like to be a Jedi. The early to mid-90s saw a glut of adventure and vehicle-based Star Wars games, such as Star Wars X-Wing and Star Wars Rebel Assault. Dark Forces, Jedi Knight's predecessor, released in 1995 and was the first formal foray into the FPS genre for Star Wars. It was the closest step LucasArts had taken to dropping us into the boots of a chiseled Jedi warrior. The dream of playing as a Jedi felt all but impossible in 1995, like the way the dream of a true Thief sequel feels impossible today. Imagine that shimmering Jedi oasis amid the scorched gaming plains, the first drink of fresh, sweet, naturally filtered groundwater to quench a dry, dusty throat. Jedi Knight was the first FPS with lightsabers and force powers. It was much more than that. It was the beginning of a cultural shift. It was a marketable blueprint for success. Lightsabers and force powers were the holy grail for the Star Wars gamer. There's no doubt that the strength of the Jedi fantasy fueled the giddy anticipation for Jedi Knight. This is succinctly relayed in the handful of online articles which have survived from that era. Reviewers were excited at the prospect of becoming a Jedi Knight, whether they were Star Wars fans or not. Dark Forces set the stage, but Jedi Knight was heading in a new direction. It had to stand on its own and survive the fresh gaze of scrutiny. Gamers were on board and eager. If I owned a PC back then, I would have pestered my folks into double shifts in the salt mines so that we could afford that sweet new hardware acceleration. Oh yeah. Jedi Knight rode the first wave of games to take advantage of this powerful advance in gaming graphics. Hardware acceleration was a literal game changer, which allowed for drastically improved graphics, smoother frame rates, and powerful new processing techniques. The difference was night and day. That's night with a K. So, not only were we promised a Jedi game, we also knew that it would utilize the latest advance in gaming technology, which promised to steer the industry in an exciting new direction. Anticipation, though, is just a word. It doesn't convey the restlessness which kept bums out of seats, that carved worn paths in carpets and scuffed a circuitous trail on floorboards, that dragged conscious thought to daydreams of swashbuckling lightsaber adventures on a distant world. Gamers thirsted for Jedi adventure, and they finally had a glimpse of that future. Excitement grew with fresh screenshots in glossy-skinned game magazines. Some of those images would become reality in the final release of the game. Some hinted at features which were cut during development. Images like the concept art for AT-AT-8's pet, Kyle riding a speeder vehicle, and even a Tusken staff weapon didn't make the final cut, and we can only speculate on the evolving vision of the developers. It didn't matter back then, it was all Star Wars and it was awesome. Jedi Knight's development had wrinkles thanks to the strict oversight of Lucasfilm. All narrative and character decisions fell under their long arm of the law. The rapidly expanding breadth of Star Wars stories in the 90s required someone to ensure continuity across all works. This was despite George Lucas famously saying that he considered the movies and expanded universe as separate timelines. Jedi Knight was no exception. The team weren't allowed to use established movie characters, and I doubt this was public knowledge at the time. That was another Lucasfilm hallmark, the smothering, mothering need to keep many details of Jedi Knight under wraps. Lucasfilm zealously guarded their intellectual property, which also limited what the team was allowed to show. The Tuskens in the game are an example of concessions for the new story. They're referred to as Grave Tuskens, a thuggish sect of Tusken raiders who eschew the traditional face mask of their Tatooine kin and are known for robbing the dead. They fall under the Dark Jedi Maws employ and were just different enough to pass muster with Lucasfilm whilst still being recognisable. If the stories about Mystery of the Sith's development are anything to go by, the dev team needed serious Olympic-level crotch-splitting gymnastics to persuade Lucasfilm to agree to their vision of Star Wars. This information might open your eyes if you have romanticized visions of cavalier game development in the 90s, programmed by long-haired Romero-esque rock stars. I mention all of this to lend deeper context to Jedi Knight's release. Games are often analysed in isolation or compared with peers in the industry for parity. It's uncommon to hear about the external cultural phenomenon driving interest in a video game. Jedi Knight was cut from this cloth thanks to the reinvigorated interest in Star Wars. Fans were pumped. Gamers were pumped. Jedi Knight was going to be a big deal. I'll bet that many Star Wars fans thought they were ready. I held no such illusion. None of us were ready. That was apparent as my friend wowed me with each new set-piece, encounter and deadly lightsaber duel. The thing which struck me early was how authentic it all was. It felt like Star Wars. The snappy laser crack of the Imperial rifle as it blasted them. The steady whine of vehicles travelling overhead. The warbled echoed challenge of a Gran as he raised his fists. The tinny treble-heavy imperatives of the Imperial army, bent on crushing dissent. And the snap hiss that moistens every earthen loin the moment people hear it. With audio this crisp, it's no surprise to learn that the development team had access to the Skywalker sound libraries, though they created original sounds too. There was a moment in the first level as protagonist Kyle Katarn blasted through Nar Shaddaa and onto a windswept catwalk between buildings. Old school fans are smiling, I see you. This moment sealed it, for everyone. How thrilling it was to see a TIE bomber take off right in front of me. Who else impulsively mouthed the high-pitched roar as it flew past? This was one of many scripted events which brought the setting to life and marked Kyle's perilous adventure across the galaxy. Jedi Knight's scripting language, COG, created dynamic environments. Sometimes they were simple changes. Sometimes they changed with great complexity, such as a TIE bomber strafing the rooftop of an Imperial tower. There were many moments like this which made it clear that this game had been made with reverence for the source material. Underpinning the experience by no trivial degree was the signature John Williams score. A good score adds incredible weight to a gaming experience. The development team must have known this and fought hard for its inclusion. Instead of the standard Williams soundtrack though, Jedi Knight's score was built from recognizable chunks which were stitched into their own unique tracks. It was incredibly well done, transitioning from piece to piece in an organic and logical progression, yet retaining the soul of the original music. Music was the final layer of authenticity, the key to Jedi Knight's pull as an independent brand. The game wouldn't be the same without it. I read a recent tweet which said that Jedi Knight's soundtrack had reprogrammed the tweeters' association with the John Williams score. They now associated these themes with Jedi Knight and not the movies. This resonated with me. Pick any track and I can tell you exactly which levels it's used in thanks to the beautifully repurposed themes. Jedi Knight's tracks evoke a nostalgia that only familiarity brings, but their true power is in the familiar flutter of the flute, the bombast of the trumpet, and the swelling rhythm of the strings. John Williams has a unique signature that's hard, if not impossible, to replicate, and the gravity that it lends to the setting is undeniable. It's quintessentially Star Wars. Williams is the only composer whose music I can hear in other movies and think, that would fit in Star Wars. I bet this is John Williams. Jedi Knight's character models were, well, they were the literal definition of polygons. The hands were 3D rhomboids for God's sake. Characters were blocky, especially compared to Quake 2, which released in December of the same year. If we're fair, this was common character design for the time, but muddy, low-saturation textures compounded the issue, and made character models look as though they'd had the detailed pixel stuffing beaten out of them by a Minecraft pickaxe. IGN were a different caliber back then, and their comment on character models is worth iterating. Quote, "The character models can be pretty rough, but we know very well what they're supposed to be, so our imaginations can take over when the polygons don't do the trick." End quote. A short aside, friends, because this is a great point which is missing far too often in retrospective reviews. Although technology was reaching the point where environments could become more fully realized, there was still a need for players to actively engage with the game, to not only accept the vision playing out on screen, but to embellish it. That is, players were encouraged to use their imagination. We live in an age of high-fidelity everything. Environments in modern games are flush with detail, which creates an interesting side effect that I've especially noticed myself succumb to. Player attention is so sought after now, particularly as a function of commercial success, that players are led by the nose through environments. Important items are highlighted in some way, and so any item which doesn't have a mechanical purpose, you're passively encouraged to ignore. For all their potency, these focus techniques work with laser precision, paid for with relinquished imagination. I've become lazier at engaging with high clutter games because I know that 95% of it is just clutter, not worth my attention. It's become an active effort to engage with some modern games. Jedi Knight's level design was limited by technology at the time. The upside was that the mind grew adept at filling the blanks. Like Ultra HD wrong-think, minus the beatings. IGN's previous comment is a thought capsule from the mid to late 90s. Should modern gamers think this way too? Yes, to some degree. Storytelling doesn't happen on a page or a screen, but in the way we interpret what's presented. Events may be crystal clear, but detail varies from person to person, and details are essential to the life of fiction. The more willing the mind is at filling this detail, the more invested you become. Despite the low texture quality and polygon count of character models, their animations were fluid and believable and pleasing to watch. Some animations still hold up. I've always loved Kyle's sprint in first person, the way he swings the weapon from side to side to the rhythm of his steps. It really is the little things that can make an experience. Jedi Knight's combat was distinct from other shooters. It wasn't drenched in the edgy gore which many shooters boasted as a selling point. Strict directives from Lucasfilm kept Jedi Knight's violence in check. No blood, no gore, and I have no idea how the devs convinced Lucasfilm to include dismemberment, but that was the only concession. The Star Wars license also demanded a different approach to gunplay. The devs couldn't load Kyle with outlandish weapons and boot him out the door with a slap on the tush and a "Go get him, Tiger." Weapons had to be authentic to the setting, yet still feel like a progressive power curve. Jedi Knight did an impressive job of riding that curve for a lineup which included 4 energy weapons. Early gunplay is a satisfying blend of run and gun and careful advance. The starting Briar pistol and Imperial rifle get the job done, and the Imperial rifle quickly earns its stripes. Enemies aren't spongy, they fall after a couple of shots, and Kyle's speed makes him a nimble target for Nar Shadar's undesirables, a sensation felt as energy bolts whiz past Kyle in the thick of battle. The deviously simple early hours of guns, platforming and hazards define a core loop that would endure the whole runtime of most shooters, but something else sets Jedi Knight apart from its peers and helped carve a niche in '97. That's right, the lightsaber and force powers. Kyle recovers his lightsaber after level 3 and the game steadily shifts gears. Run and gun recontextualizes from a core loop to a tactical choice, yet another tool dangling from Kyle's thick belt. That snap hiss, watching the blade extend for the first time. It was a religious experience, a knighting of the player as much as the player character. Permission to take up the Jedi tools and fight the good fight. Lightsabers are everywhere now, and force powers are as common as farts, but they were rare in '97, and being able to use them in a game was a joyous celebration. There's an implicit power when players are wed to a lightsaber, and it's immediately felt, even in Kyle's untrained hands. Most humanoid enemies go down with a single slash, and blocking enemy fire is tenuous but possible. Enemy placement and exploration shift to accommodate the new combat options. Early moments with the lightsaber are careful experimentation and cautious play. Enemies pose a greater threat to the uninitiated Jedi Knight, who may be tempted to waggle his glow stick with impotent bravado and eat a few shots in the process. Enemies are still devious, and they get tougher as the levels pass, bringing nasty hardware to bear against Kyle. Enemy placement is calculated throughout the adventure. Unlike the mindless rush or useless dawdle of enemies from other shooters of the time, Jedi Knight's enemies exhibit cunning through design. They aren't programmed to be clever, but they're well paced, ensuring that Kyle constantly meets resistance. Enemies can wait in ambush or behind cover, biding their time even when Kyle makes noise or reveals himself. There are likely multiple AI trigger conditions for these enemies, which present the illusion of natural behavior. It's a simple but balanced trick, and as a result, encounters feel considered. Good enemy placement adds pleasing tension to exploration. This scrapes a keen edge onto the power curve as the challenge escalates to keep pace with Kyle's burgeoning power. The developers realized that players needed to adjust to their new Jedi powers. No section feels tougher than it should, and in a game that had to balance the awesome might of a Jedi against the limitless Imperial forces, that's an achievement to be applauded. You feel the awesome might of potential the moment you slice the grate in Morgan's workshop. The lightsaber isn't only a weapon. If you were playing back in '97, this would have blown the cap off your skull and the crusty seat out of your pants. The lightsaber is a dual-purpose item, truly a stroke of genius. It's easy with hindsight to say that letting the lightsaber cut stuff is a given, but let's not undersell how influential that template is in later titles. Jedi Knight had that vision, and it laid the groundwork for future titles to build upon. I haven't even talked about force powers yet. A Jedi without force powers would be like Finn, all swagger and no substance. Kyle earns 4 stars for completing many levels. The stars represent Kyle's growing Jedi potential as he overcomes challenges. From the end of level 3, they can be spent to purchase an expanding pool of powers. Kyle doesn't begin to earn 4 stars regularly until the end of level 4. Why unlock force power selection before stars are earned? Because finding all secrets in a level also earns a 4 star, including the first 3 levels. Some commentary videos have questioned earning a 4 star via secret hunting. They argue that it doesn't make narrative sense to reward Kyle in this way. I've always believed that the secret star was a symbolic presentation of Kyle's observation and his ability to think outside the box. In short, it represents the 6th sense which Jedi seem to have for finding that which is hidden. Force stars aren't just a mechanical feature to buy powers. They represent Kyle's force strength in a couple of ways. Using powers costs force mana, and this mana pool begins small. At the beginning, Kyle tires after casting a single power and must wait until mana replenishes before casting again. As the mana pool deepens, Kyle can cast more powers before needing a breather. Kyle's force strength also manifests as the improved ability to block blaster fire. When he first wraps his digits around a lightsaber, Kyle's ability to block is akin to catching a falling meteor with his mouth. It's barely practical and fails often enough that trying to block almost always means eating damage. As his force strength increases, Kyle not only blocks blaster fire consistently, he'll even deflect it back to the shooter, which is an immensely satisfying twist on the Jedi power fantasy. Players are encouraged to switch between conventional firepower and Jedi tools early in the game. It's a playful allegory for Kyle's struggle between the brutal familiarity of his old life as a mercenary and his uncertain destiny as a Jedi Knight. Kyle's reluctance to cut his old life free is felt every time the player leans on conventional firepower. The road ahead is always obscured, and there's comfort in the familiar. As Kyle's power grows, the new path not only becomes more familiar, but also more enticing. What a power trip to stand in a room full of stormtroopers, deflecting bolts until only Kyle stands. A situation Blondie knows well. What did high-functioning medium think of the combat?
What also made Jedi Knight so great was its freedom to use whatever weapons you wanted to. Want to use the skills you spent your whole life building? Well, whip out your Briar Pistol, an Imperial Repeater, Rail Launcher, or Concussion Rifle and go to town. Totally into your new life as a wizard with a glowing knife that treats everything like butter? Go on with your bad self. Everything from level variety to weapon effects to story was satisfying in some profound way, and it was likely the most comprehensive expression of the reasons people like Star Wars, and that was just the main campaign.
You nailed it, partner. A key component of the evolving power fantasy is the choice. Follow the light side and become a Jedi Knight, or embrace the dark side's corrupt self-indulgence. The choice coalesces 2/3 through the game in a moment of piercing vulnerability, but the decision is made well before then. Moment-to-moment actions of cruelty and carelessness are tracked by a morality meter over the course of the game. Want to become a pious Jedi Knight? No worries. Don't kill the innocent and you're on your way. Most players could, and probably did, achieve this by accident. It's paradoxically easy to follow the light side in the face of adversity. Conversely, you really need to work at becoming a Dark Jedi if that's your goal. This is an odd juxtaposition when a moral lesson of this story is that doing the right thing can be the hardest choice. There are sneaky moments injected by the developers, which encourage less pew-pew and more caution, such as lemming workers milling around explosives while a trigger-happy maniac races through their fuel station. Even an aggressive player who is occasionally careless and ends a handful of civilians is unlikely to travel the dark path. As cool as this system is, I wish it were pursued more deeply, or that there were more situations which test light side restraint. I appreciate the streamlined power fantasy, but players shouldn't be able to fall into the light side. Taken a step further, Kyle is bent on vengeance for much of the story, which is inherently dark and should set that course as default. The player must dig themselves out of that hole if they want a noble ending. Gameplay changes dramatically to suit the pool of available force powers, regardless of which side the player picks. Would you look at that? A segue into force powers. Jedi Knight's powers are split between 3 categories: neutral, light, and dark. The neutral category holds 4 powers, while the light and dark categories hold 5 powers each. The 5th power in the light and dark categories only unlocks if the player has only invested stars into neutral powers and powers of that category. A Jedi Knight won't unlock Force Protection if they invested in dark side powers, and a Sith won't unlock Deadly Sight if they invested in light side powers. It's a neat twist on committing to the roleplay of good or bad. Most powers must be allocated at least 1 star to be usable, but they can be allocated up to 4 stars for more potent power. The player is free to spend stars how they like, which makes for a range of possible builds. Only secret hunters will come close to maxing all powers in a single play. No, you can't max everything. Neutral powers are about utility and movement. Light powers focus on defense and support. And dark powers are raw damage. Neutral powers get the lion's share of use. Powers like jump and pull are too useful to leave on the bench and are helpful often. Force power audio effects deserve special mention. They pair with the action well and are pleasing to the ear. The charge whoosh of Force Jump is a standout. I feel the build-up and explosive power of this ability, especially when I leap into a low ceiling. Light side powers are a different bag. Force Persuasion makes Kyle invisible, but there are few situations which benefit from this approach. Blinding an enemy with Force Blinding sounds good in practice, but Force Pull is more effective and mana efficient. Neither of these powers are effective against Dark Jedi, which limits their potential. Force Absorb converts incoming damage from some Force powers into mana. This also sounds great on paper, but costs a lot of mana and is only useful against Dark Jedi, who infrequently use Force powers. Healing is a true game changer. The ability to heal without health pickups or back to tanks is a huge leg up which encourages experimentation and brash play. Healing is particularly potent in lightsaber duels, though duels aren't as daunting as they sound. I'll get to them soon. Persuasion, blinding, and even absorb to an extent are poorly balanced for the single-player campaign. They're toys in a toy chest with little reason to play with them. The toy chest is thrown wide open for Dark Jedi. All dark side powers are varying flavors of death and are fun to use. Deadly Sight, Destruction, and Lightning are great at crowd control, while Grip is a personal touch. Throw is situational and the weakest of the group because of this, but all powers are delightful chaos and there's no mistaking the badassery of sauntering into battle while flinging bolts of goddamn lightning. Schwarzenegger silhouetted slow motion explosions don't look this cool. Darkside powers are power manifest, an outward expression of inner malevolence, and there's nothing like the satisfaction of watching your enemies wilt under your irrepressible strength. The dark side has a drawback: the inability to force heal. The Dark Jedi axiom of destructive impulse holds true, and this has a profound impact on gameplay, especially in later levels where resistance is stiff. Unlike the Cavalier Jedi Knight, who can force heal when the Bacta runs dry, Dark Jedi must play a more cautious game. This isn't a game design flaw, but an interesting spin on the Dark Jedi power fantasy. Burn bright, burn quick, burn out. The Jedi's choice was an interesting feature for the time, a bonus enticement to experience the game from different perspectives. There are interesting knock-on effects which give Kyle's chosen path additional heft. Ran provides monologue before each battle with a Dark Jedi and at key moments during the game.
Young, a young and willing Dark Jedi, the newest addition to the cause. Brash and eager, he is ready to prove himself to his master at any cost. These elements make him a dangerous and unpredictable foe.
His is the voice of calm before a storm of sabers and lightning. You feel as though Ran has joined Kyle for his quest, that he's always there, willing Kyle on. You come to expect Ran's monologue, so that you can mentally prepare for combat. The in-game cutscene before each duel has always felt representative of a disembodied Ran, providing Kyle with perspective on his opponent before settling into him for the battle. I find these moments powerful in a way that's comforting. In a dastardly dark side spin of developer cruelty, Ran deserts Kyle if he chooses the dark side. Ran's monologue lies unspoken, and even the in-game cutscene before each fight disappears. Kyle is left only with his bitter vengeance for company. This is a small touch, but it has a powerful effect. In a modern game, you'd be inclined to point out Ran's absence as a bug, but it's deliberate design in Jedi Knight. Ran's absence makes the journey to confront Jarek a lonely one, and further highlights how evil has no friends. It's a brilliant detail which elbows you with a stern, "Hey, remember, you chose this path." Levels can be challenging in their own right, but it's the culmination of story beats which offer a true test of Kyle's power. Chief Bad Guy and Chapstick Champion Jarek has gathered 6 lackeys to act as fodder, and Kyle must defeat each one, except Saris in the dark side path. This was the good stuff. This is what fans had been waiting on for years. Hyperbole be damned, I can't understate how damn cool this was. In my fledgling playthroughs all those years ago, these duels were tough and uncompromising. The Dark Jedi were formidable, and I saw many death screens while besting this tour de force. These duels had to be the defining factor in Jedi Knight's success, right? This from an IGN RetroView article on Jedi Knight from the year 2000. Quote, "Although the bosses are great in theory, they don't work very well in practice. Lightsaber combat with the Dark Jedi is a frustrating exercise in just clicking the hell out of your mouse and hoping your health holds out. Sword fighting has always been hard to get right in action games, and Jedi Knight is pretty primitive in this regard." End quote. The hammer hit most of the nail there. Each duel has a loose formula that goes something like this. Dark Jedi spams force powers, their mana pool runs dry, Dark Jedi closes and attacks with lightsaber, Kyle usually blocks, sometimes he doesn't, ouch, repeat until someone falls. That sounds bad, but there's more. Dark Jedi shrug off many of Kyle's force powers, regardless of which side he chooses. Blinding is fleeting, and powers including Persuasion, Deadly Sight, Grip, and, to some extent, Throw, are useless. Yes, pedants will point out that Throw can be used in some duels, but not all, and it's hard to entice Dark Jedi into areas with debris, which can also be thrown at Kyle. Destruction and Lightning still damage Dark Jedi, but these powers have a hefty mana cost, and can't be used often. On the flip side, unless Kyle uses Absorb, he's susceptible to everything they throw at him, metaphorically and literally. Duels involve more vigorous slicing than a Michelin star chef, and, as IGN points out, hoping that your health holds out. I'll let you in on a secret I discovered ages ago. All Dark Jedi are a pushover, and I'll show you how. Circle strafe around them, maintaining a lightsaber length's distance, circling away from their lightsaber hand. Begin a lightsaber swing, then pivot your view toward them as the attack is 2/3 completed. If done correctly, the lightsaber should clip their back and either trigger a parry or cause damage. The back is unguarded, and Kyle has a better chance of landing a hit than frontal attacks. Furthermore, Dark Jedi struggle to keep up with circle strafing, so they'll always be angled away from you, which makes their lightsaber attacks miss frequently. Their awkward angle means that force attacks will also miss. Yes, even lightning. They will very occasionally land a lucky hit which Kyle can't block, and if you botch the timing or angle, then Kyle is wide open for a counterattack. But this is an otherwise foolproof technique. On every single Dark Jedi. Jarek's parry is more aggressive and his attacks are quicker, but he's no exception. You're welcome. If this sounds like condemnation, it is. Lightsaber battles lack the depth to make them interesting. Based on these observations, you might assume that I hate them. I don't, thanks to a simple counterpoint: the encounter design. Hear me out before you cry contradiction. Duels have always been about the deadly spectacle, cheerless gladiators facing off in a spectator-deprived arena. When the combatants ignite their lightsabers, they understand that there can be only one. Each fight gets its own level because it's center stage, a moment to be dreaded and remembered. I remember the first time I fought Yun. Kyle had just got his hands on a lightsaber and had few powers under his belt. I was daunted and drastically underprepared. A level earlier, I was a mercenary mowing down stormtroopers with a blaster rifle. Now, I stood before a Dark Jedi, as much my equal thanks to the blade of power in his hands as his talent with the Force. Each duel is also different enough to make them feel distinct, and some come with unique challenges. The fight with Maw is on catwalks over an abyssal drop where a single misstep sends Kyle tumbling to his death. The twins, Gork and Pick, force Kyle to confront 2 Dark Jedi at once. The fight with Bok, my least favourite fight, is against an opponent who jumps constantly. There's enough variation in each fight to make them feel different. I believe that many will appreciate this. IGN made another point in their article which I haven't substantiated but found interesting. Quote, later titles like System Shock 2 and Deus Ex, in which your character learns new powers that change the gameplay, owe a lot to Jedi Knight, but these tend to be action RPGs with extensive inventory management and skill systems, whereas Jedi Knight is very much a combat-oriented first-person shooter. I would say the only game to really duplicate Jedi Knight's concept of streamlined, game-altering force powers is 3DO's underrated Requiem. End quote. And just like that, Requiem Avenging Angel makes my playlist. Drop into the comments if you'd like to see it covered soon. Incidentally, Requiem was the first game to feature a bullet time mechanic. It released 8 days before the first Matrix movie. But back to Jedi Knight. Duels do little to dull the laser-sharp edge of the Jedi power fantasy. Jedi Knight thrives as a playground, encouraging players to explore the limits of their power and flex it hard and often against Imperial forces. Force powers altered gameplay in exciting and interesting ways and recontextualized spaces with fresh potential. This template defined the Jedi Knight series to critical success, and it all began here. Scale and verticality were defining features of the Jedi Knight experience. The sheer scale of some levels made me feel insignificant in this vast galaxy of plenty. I had never seen environments so large and vertical in a video game. Jedi Knight was the first game to make me feel a surge of gut-punching vertigo as I looked over the bottomless drops of Nar Shaddaa, or struggled to keep my footing on a windy ledge far above the besieged city of Baron's Head. Some environments are huge, and you feel it in a tacitly visceral way. The only other game I felt vertigo like this is Dying Light, almost 20 years later. The link to my Dying Light analysis is in the description. Wink wink. I've commented on Jedi Knight's scale before, and some misunderstood it to mean the overall size of something, like a Duke Nukem level. I'll show you what I mean, so that we're on the same page. How big would that ship in the distance be? The correct answer, in Australian, is fucking massive. Scale is the size of something compared to something else. Not the geographical footprint of a level, not winding corridors or interactive shortcuts. You're small compared to a whale. You're huge compared to an ant. That's scale. Sorry for the rant, but not really. Jedi Knight's levels and set pieces are huge, which is consistent with the Star Wars setting. The cathedral effect is the sense of open space characterized by high ceilings in churches and cathedrals. It plays upon the perception of spatial volume to make the interior feel grand and expansive, and to lend everything within that space an equally cardinal weight. Star Wars has always felt this way, designed and presented as a place of grand adventure, the cathedral effect on a massive scale. Jedi Knight maintains this spatial consistency throughout its presentation, and it has always been a component of the game threaded deeply among its DNA. The Jedi Knight experience is synonymous with large open spaces, massive structures, and a scale which portrays an overwhelming personal fragility. Spatial psychology aside, these environments have a positive effect on gameplay. They let Force powers breathe, and they fully engage players in the three-dimensionality of the setting. The tall structures and long distances invite experimentation. Why fight at ground level if you can leap somewhere higher? That alcove far up the canyon wall looks too high to reach, but is it possible with Force jump? You always win if you have the high ground, apparently. Jedi Knight surprised me with its flexibility, dared me to discover new secrets and shortcuts. These opinions are my own, recounting a simple, observable truth, but I know some like to question the validity of these observations. From the IGN article I mentioned previously, quote, "Also, no other first-person shooter has come close to Jedi Knight's dizzying sense of scale and its vast levels. Unlike dungeon-based engines like Quake and Unreal, Jedi Knight goes on and on in all directions. Even better, there is a thrilling rush of vertigo when you look down the side of a building or into a chasm. Even though you can always reload if you fall, you'll feel a strangely tangible sense of dread when you're working your way across a precarious set of beams or a narrow ledge on a cliff." End quote. Another from Super Jump magazine, quote, "One of the highlights of Jedi Knight was its level design. The game's 20 levels are immense, orders of magnitude larger than levels in many modern shooters." End quote. The Super Jump article is from January 2023. No one else was developing levels and architecture at this scale in a first-person shooter at the time. No distance fog to smother the illusion either. Verticality and gargantuan scale are the Jedi Knight experience, but even this is merely one aspect of Jedi Knight's fantastic level design. A quick aside before we move on. I saw aggressive texture pop in during my recent playthrough, and I can't recall if this was present in the original game or whether it's a side effect of being run on modern drivers. The load distance is ridiculously short, but this was likely a concession for stable frame rates at the time. It's noticeable in-game, though I got used to it. If this bothers you, stick around for the mod section later in the video. One of Jedi Knight's more endearing qualities, and a contributor to its success, is how the levels emulate the character of the Star Wars setting in a disarmingly authentic way. From the moment you step into this world, it's clear that it's Star Wars, deep within its negative spaced bones. This becomes more apparent with each new area and encounter. The aesthetic has that round-edged, light-studded look that was popular in sci-fi of the 70s, but coated in grit, which is appropriate for Kyle's dark journey. Each level is adventure and danger on a held breath. It's a fork in the road at the bounty of choice. It's rambling freedom and the freedom to ramble, like this script. The way forward isn't always a doorway, an exit sign, or flashing marker. It's often none of these things, which is true of many Star Wars adventures. The path is whatever Kyle makes of it when conventional means are frequently absent. One of Half-Life's most lauded achievements was guiding players out of linear corridors and contrived mazes, and making them feel as though they were carving a path through the environment. Half-Life was a genius culmination of the experience from other titles, a streamlining of that ethos into a slick, funneled endpoint. It was a glorious illusion, but an illusion nonetheless. The path forward was still linear, but cleverly hidden inside vents and through exploded walls. Jedi Knight's open-level design deepens the illusion of bushwhacking through Imperial undergrowth in a way that I never felt with Half-Life. That's a discussion for a Half-Life video though. While not cited anywhere that I could find, it's hard to believe that Valve weren't taking notes of Jedi Knight's ambitiously creative level progression. Jedi Knight has players slashing grates under lifts, picking through dangerous machinery, and even traversing the interior of highly volatile fuel tanks to progress. Build engine games like Duke Nukem showed the promise of this design. Then Jedi Knight evolved it. Kyle leaves the well-established path so often that even the Force might wonder if he's the right guy for the job, but it's all in service to the fantasy adventure that tugs at the excitable child's heart in all of us. This is what exploration is all about. Jedi Knight tells a story through level design. Take the city of Baron's Head under oppressive Imperial lockdown. You ponder how people are treated in a city where massive blast shields keep citizens away from the Imperial Tower. Houses are destroyed, the district ruins surrounding the tower are mined to buggery, and free-roaming thugs menace the citizenry. This is a city in the steel grip of Imperial rule. The passage of time is also marked through the game. When Kyle first boards the Zeppelin-esque cargo ship, the sky is a vibrant cloud-stroked blue. After Kyle recovers AT-88's head, the day is closing into a bright orange glow. There are other examples like this, like heading into the Baron's Head Tower during the day and the escape from the tower at night. Small touches which give events a sense of momentum and time within the galaxy. Jedi Knight uses other tricks to tell a story, like this vertically scrolling wall texture which simulates the cargo ship plunging toward the jagged canyon floor. This, combined with the way the ship tilts sideways throughout the level, another inspired touch, are brutally effective at punching home the immediacy of the danger. At one point, the sky depicts one of the oldest techniques in storytelling: tempestuous weather. Racing clouds and distant storms are frequently used in storytelling as a metaphor for the approaching battle, inciting a sense of haste and danger. Storytelling through design. A couple more examples. There are small touches for the keen eye. This chair propped against a wall with brewskis nearby. Who can't relate to reclining in a chair and pondering the world with a drink in hand? Or the nature of secret areas and their context within the world. Why on earth would someone stash so much gear in—
Long live the rebellion.
Oh, it's a rebel weapons cache. That's clever. One criticism leveled at Jedi Knight is that levels are too abstract. I wholly disagree, and I think this criticism misses the point of the design. The expansive levels, the huge scale, that is the design. There's enough embellishment to add character, but the developers trusted player imagination to fill the blanks. Remember, this was an imagination-fueled era where graphics and visual clutter hadn't fully consumed the creative compartment in our minds. Level austerity was the standard in fully 3D games, which had a processing budget that devs couldn't exceed. That was the compromise, until hardware began to catch up. Claustrophobic hallways and labyrinthine passages wouldn't have cut it with Jedi Knight, no matter how packed with detail they were. Force powers need open space to be appreciated. The developers knew this, and they executed their vision with clarity. It's not perfect, but it was the right choice, and I'm confident that modern players will appreciate this as Jedi Knight gets mainstream exposure. Environments are playfully crafted and crafted for play. Exploration is a delight, and each discovery feels earned because players are allowed to unleash the full effect of their force powers. Hell, I discovered something on this playthrough that I hadn't considered before. See this pipe? It leads across the river to the end of the level, but it's really high and I never bothered trying to jump to it. Until now. Yes, it is really high, but I just made it with rank 4 jump. I was proud of this, a discovery that the community has likely known about for decades. Stephen Chen, one of Jedi Knight's level designers, made insightful comments about the game's level design. This piece is taken from the strategy guide, and I'm quoting the full paragraph which was part of an interview with Stephen. Quote, "The genre is usually about tunnel hunts," he says, "but our engine supports a much bigger geometry, so we wanted to open up the space more." Chen enhanced the open feeling by designing levels that weren't strictly linear. You ask, what is the purpose of this space? That drives the design, he says. In Mission 17, for example, we needed a military base freshly dug out of the rock. The story drove the design, and the gameplay evolved from that. So it's not just a frag fest, it's figuring out how the geometry and gameplay and puzzles make sense in light of the story. How do they move the story forward? End quote. Another level designer, Reed Derleth, always looked to incorporate the central conflicting theme of light versus dark into his work. His levels feature moral situations and choices for players to bumble into. He was the designer of the Baron's Head and Fuel Station levels, which have many opportunities for careless civilian casualties. Let's move to another of Jedi Knight's divisive points. I'm talking about puzzle solving and navigation. Sweet thunderfart of Zeus, some of the complaints on this one make it seem as though level exploration and open design was an abomination which tumbled solely from Jedi Knight's girthy loins. Are we ignoring that exploration has been around throughout the shooter lineage? Jedi Knight's approach was less conventional, and that's why it stood above the crowd and is still remembered fondly. I've been stuck in plenty of conventional shooters, Doom and Duke 3D among them, but it never dulled my enthusiasm for those games. A little head scratching is expected with exploration, and I'd argue that many level designers would consider it a design failure if players didn't stop to think about how to progress occasionally. That said, puzzle solving is generally light, though there are sections which require lateral thinking to overcome. The Imperial Tower gates are one of the harder puzzles to figure out. Harder, but not unfair, as there are environmental cues like the grate in the ceiling of the control center to guide players. Most importantly, the puzzles are appropriate to the setting and story, and they never break the adventurous stride set throughout the campaign. Puzzles are simple for the most part. Switch and key hunts are common, and the lightsaber is called to action often enough to satisfy, usually by slashing a grate or destroying a switch. The developers couldn't count on players choosing specific force powers, so none of the puzzles rely on the force, unfortunately. Navigation is where some may stumble. Jedi Knight's intra-level progression adheres closely to the surrounding architecture. If Kyle doesn't have a key or can't open a door, chances are he must climb, swim, balance, and slash to progress. This often involves digging into the guts of an Imperial stronghold, spelunking through underwater passages, riding wind tunnels, and gingerly risking his neck in places that occupational health and safety would have fits over. The path forward isn't always obvious, but this isn't a detriment to a game which emphasizes adventure. I've finished Jedi Knight many times, but it's been a while, and yes, there were places I got stuck while recording this video. Was I frustrated? Yes, because it was 11 PM on a weekday, because I was sleep deprived and exhausted at the end of a long day. I kicked myself when I found the solution though, because it was always an overlooked switch or an unexplored area which I forgot about. That's my oversight, not the game's. Having said that, some solutions are understated and could have used prominent markings to indicate that they were important. A force field inside the cargo ship had me confused for 10 minutes until I noticed a thin sliver of switch tucked into a corner which I had missed among the sea of panels. An indication that there was something important in the corner would have been nice. You're also likely to travel some distance before hitting a roadblock and realize that you needed something from earlier in the level. There are flaws to the open level design, but if you pick the wrong fork in the road, then it's harder to appreciate them. Not every level is designed like this though. With so much unique design and how interconnected these environments are, it's often easy to get your bearings again. What did High Functioning Medium think of the gameplay though?
The only real obstacle to fun was its wonky, unending level design that stopped a young me many a time from progressing until I used the level skip so I could watch yet another actually pretty decently acted and produced FMP cutscene. In fact, coming out before Half-Life is crazy to realize because so much of Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 feels similar, from its rhythm going from mountainous outdoor areas into industrial sectors, its distinctive sound effects while picking up health and ammo, and its attention towards narrative. And while the game was very easy to take seriously, you could also have quite a bit of fun just messing around, kind of like in Morrowind where you could just overpower your character. For instance, there was a flight mode that I still remember to this day was when you hit T to do commands and then put in Irium JH. There was Red 5, which was all weapons. Raccoon King, which was you unlocked all force powers. D's Nuts was the level skip. Back to Me was full health, and all sorts of other great stuff like that.
D's Nuts was the level skip?
Got him!
I've always enjoyed Jedi Knight's level design. Its daring exploitation of open space stands the test of time and is a unique trait among the shooter market. You won't find level design quite like Jedi Knight's. Whether it's your flavor or not is answered with a simple question. Do I prefer strictly linear action games? If the answer is yes, then navigating Jedi Knight may be a jarring experience. But if there's even an ounce of thrill-seeking adventurer in you, then you'll likely appreciate Jedi Knight's challenges. Did I mention that the developers had tertiary qualifications as architects, science graduates, and other equally esteemed fields? It shows. Knowing this goes a long way to understanding how Jedi Knight's setting functions. Jedi Knight is a simple tale told with Star Wars flourish. Man grows epic beard, goes after his father's killer, inherits the burden of legacy, then rises to become worthy of its bestowal. It's a fine story which receives more hate than it deserves. The story isn't perfect, but its simplicity keeps it grounded where other plots lose the audience with intricate betrayal or overly clever twists. Jedi Knight's plot comprises 3 of the 7 story archetypes: overcoming the monster, the quest, and rebirth. The story begins with overcoming the monster as Kyle hunts for his father's killer. This morphs into the quest archetype as Morgan Katan reveals the existence of the Valley of the Jedi and issues a call to power. These archetypes overlap until Kyle defeats Maul and is forced to confront his anger, where rebirth occurs. The pacing is good, the story beats are fun, and character motivations are clear and easy to get behind. The plot is delivered through full-motion video cutscenes, the first of their kind to showcase the Jedi spectacle since Return of the Jedi over a decade earlier. It's impossible to undersell the excitement at their inclusion. We were parched for Star Wars cinema, and this was the next best thing. The story opens with evil Jarek and his evil band of dark Jedi doing evil things to establish how evil they are. Jarek's actor, Christopher Neame, milks his role for all it's worth. People trash the acting and the single dimension of Jedi Knight's characters, but I love Neame's commitment to playing the quintessential bad guy in an uncomplicated story. Not every story needs to be a complex examination of the human condition. In Jarek, there is no guilt or reflection to muddy the waters, no complex persona to wade through in the Jedi power fantasy. There is good, there is evil, and that's it. Jarek is pure schlocky evil, and I'm here for it. The lip-licking quirk is overdone, but I've seen Neame's other work, and it seems to be a compulsive habit. Jarek is the power-hungry blind samurai in this laser sword Ronin tale. A lack of physical sight heightens his connection with the Force and grants him power which is compared to Darth Vader's strength. Jarek interrogates Q-Ran, a Jedi and friend of the Katan family, for information on the mythical Valley of the Jedi, a place said to house the Force essence of countless Jedi. Whoever finds it can wield great power, and in Jarek's case, subjugate the galaxy. The power Jarek uses to subdue Ran in this cutscene is described in the storyboard as a concussive blast, which could make it Force destruction. Does this look concussive though? Past gas has more destructive potential. I've always been confused by what they were going for here. Ran is billed as a powerful Jedi. That Jarek could so easily sedate him has never made sense. I questioned my friend on this the first time we watched this cutscene. Nothing remotely like this power existed in the movies or the extended universe, and I still haven't found an adequate explanation of what this power is. It's clearly not Force destruction or concussive. Keep this in mind, we'll loop back to it at the story's climax. The next cutscene begins with a beautiful flyby of Nar Shaddaa, set to the rousing, excitable swell of a John Williams score. This cutscene showcases the sheer scope and verticality of the Huttese megacity. I still get chills watching this cutscene, it hits all the notes of nostalgia. We're introduced to Kyle Katarn, Jedi Knight's protagonist, returned from Dark Forces. This sequence ties the key elements of the plot together in a logical little bow. We learn that Kyle misses his father, Morgan, and that he's hunting for Morgan's killer. The droid, AT-88, meets Kyle in a dingy bar and supplies the name of Morgan's killer, Jarek. Then he double-crosses Kyle, revealing that he's on Jarek's payroll. AT-88 tries to threaten Kyle into deciphering a disc that he found in Morgan's home, and when Kyle refuses to help, AT-88 leaves him to the tender mercies of Nar Shaddaa's underbelly. Kyle shows resourcefulness and determination, qualities of character which are most credible when shown, not narrated. Kyle overpowers the thugs, and the first level begins. I love this opening for a bunch of reasons. First, it showcases the calm competence of the protagonist. This is an important component of the power fantasy because we, as the audience, have to believe that Kyle is worthy of that mantle. Second, it injects necessary drama to warm the narrative tension. The stakes are immediately escalated as Kyle's life is threatened and his father's data disk is leaving Nar Shaddaa in someone else's hands. Third, Kyle learns who his father's killer is, giving him the agency to pursue these new goals. Yes, it is simple, but that's why I like it. It's a simple story, told simply, and it never pretends to be more. The cutscene at the end of the first level introduces Kyle's mercenary partner, Jan Ors, played by the gorgeous Angela Harry. I may have crushed on Angela back in the day. I love the drama in this cutscene, acting as a condensed cycle of the narrative tension which drives a good story. The protagonist meets the villain but loses his prize. The protagonist is imperiled and escapes by the seat of his pants. The action is snappy and allows Kyle to continue pursuing his goal at the cost of letting the villain get away. Future conflict is obviously inevitable. While healing from his injuries, Kyle has a vision in which Ran tells him about the Valley of the Jedi and its importance to galactic peace. The timing and communication of this information are too convenient. This might kill the suspension of disbelief in many stories, but Star Wars has an out. Kyle's epic beard. I'm kidding. I mean the Force. A mystical vision works well enough to increase the stakes and keep the plot moving. Incidentally, I like Ran's portrayal by actor Bennett Guillory. His grave intonation keeps the stakes grounded during the early plot. Kyle returns to his father's home on Sulon to look for clues about the data disk and the Valley of the Jedi. A couple of things are never explained in the game. How did Morgan get Ran's lightsaber if Ran died after Morgan did? And how did Morgan find the Valley of the Jedi? One of these questions is answered by the manual. Ran gave his lightsaber to Morgan when they first met, but how Morgan stumbled across the Valley's location is a mystery. Not that it matters to the plot, but it does leave unanswered questions about Morgan and his interest in, and aptitude for, the Force. I do know how Morgan stumbled over the Valley. My point is that this information isn't in the game. After Kyle recovers the lightsaber from his father's workshop, he heads through the aqueducts toward the city of Baron's Head in pursuit of AT-88. A question, dear viewer. How did Kyle know that he would find AT-88 at Baron's Head? He appears to be too far away in this cutscene to overhear Saris mention where they're heading and why. Did Kyle assume from the shuttle's flight path that they were going to Baron's Head? It's a jump in logic which is never adequately explained. Kyle locates AT-88 in a heavily guarded Imperial tower, but is confronted by Dark Jedi Yun. This is the first time that Kyle is actively opposed by Jarek's group, drawing them neatly into the conflict. Yun's actor, Rafa Weigel, hams the role, but I love the cocky energy that he brings to Yun. Although this limp-wristed fourth push is... What is this? If Yun were tempered with a touch of somber, he'd be my favourite Dark Jedi of the seven. Yun's defeat is the deepest the narrative gets in technical complexity. He's the youngest and least experienced of the Dark Jedi, and despite the bravado, he's uncertain of his path. His preconceptions of what a Jedi is are warped, either through personal experience or by the insidious influence of his new playmates. Kyle's benevolence is unexpected to Yun, and forces an internal wrestle with his perception of the Jedi and his motives. This struggle plagues him off-screen and has potential consequences later in the story. While I don't mind a simple plot, I enjoy Yun's complexity and his new hesitance to abandon the compassion and humanity that he has been taught to hate. Kyle pursues AT-88 to a refueling station outside of Baron's Head. He learns where AT-88 was heading from their previous encounter, but Jarek provides no detail about the ship. How did Kyle know which ship to board? Was there a flashing neon sign advertising a free beard trim inside? Was there only one ship at the refueling station? Gaps in logic make the audience pause. We're good at detecting plot inconsistencies, though we may lack the tools to pinpoint how and why something doesn't work. This often manifests as a feeling that something isn't right. This point is a minor infraction, but infractions add up. AT-88 gets his well-deserved payment from the Dark Jedi Gork and Pick, a reward which they're eager to share with Kyle. Little is known about the pair. They exist to escalate the conflict and challenge Kyle's recovery of the Valley's location, further entrenching Kyle on their hit list. Jarek's forces converge on the Valley, with Kyle a step behind. A pivotal moment occurs when Kyle defeats another Dark Jedi, Maw, and is goaded into killing him. This is the tipping point for Kyle's motivation to pursue Jarek. Jarek captures Jan and presents her to Kyle as a token sacrifice to show his commitment to the dark side. This is a fork in the road whose outcome is chosen well before this moment. Jason Court's portrayal of Kyle's vulnerability during this cutscene is raw and powerful, coming from such a strong figure, and it's the most earnest and heartfelt moment in the story. If I had the opportunity to speak to Jason Court, this scene is my one burning question. What was going through his mind when he filmed it? Thanks to an interview with Justin Chin, the game's director, I know the answer. Jason's own troubled childhood was laid bare in his performance, drawing upon a well of emotion to fill the moment. Kyle has killed in anger, which is a betrayal of his father's wishes. This isn't a revelation, as Kyle has struggled with revenge since the beginning of this story. It would catch him eventually. We're also glossing over the countless stormtroopers, Grands, Rodians, and Trandoshans that Kyle has run through. Ludonarrative dissonance is common in shooters with stories about morality, but it's justified with clear good guys and bad guys. You know, like real life. If Kyle chooses the dark side, he kills Jan and announces his intention to take the power of the Valley for himself. This choice lacks footage of Kyle's deed, as well as the usual polish on display up to now. It feels phoned in, and I wonder if it was a last-minute inclusion or if the team simply didn't have the time or budget for another cutscene. If Kyle chooses the light side, he refuses Jarek's offer and spares Jan's life. Either way, the outcome is the same. Jarek attacks Kyle and forces him on board the cargo ship, which begins a free fall to the canyon floor. Kyle pulls off a dramatic escape, which ends with another Dark Jedi battle. If Kyle has turned to the light side, he crashes the Moldy Crow during the escape. Disarmed, disoriented, and helpless, Kyle can only watch as Bok destroys his only means of defense. Saris moves in for the kill, but Yun intervenes and she kills him instead. Before Yun over-dramatically dies, Saris asks him,
"Why?"
He is a Jedi. He deserves a battle.
I wish they reshot this scene because Yun's over-dramatized death sucks the emotion from the moment. Kyle uses Yun's lightsaber to defeat Saris. I've always found the destruction of Kyle's lightsaber symbolic of a separate kind of rebirth, a relinquishment of the sentiment for such items. Free of this sentiment, Kyle takes a hold of his destiny in earnest, reborn as a stronger man who is no longer reliant on emotional crutches to stand tall. If Kyle has turned to the dark side, he doesn't crash the Moldy Crow during his escape. He does, however, land in the same spot he would have crashed on the light side path and fights Yun instead of Saris. Narratively speaking, this makes no sense. What reason does Kyle have to land here? Further, he hasn't crash-landed, so the Dark Jedi have no reason to be here either. It's like everyone got the memo for a Fight Club meet at the bottom of the canyon. More evidence that the dark side storyline is undercooked and might be a late consideration instead of an original design choice. It's fun to ponder how Kyle's path determines Yun's fate. If Kyle chooses the light side, Yun admires Kyle's strength and resolution in the face of overwhelming adversity, and he comes to realize that Jedi aren't what he was told they were. It's easy to imagine Kyle's dogged advance fueling Yun's self-doubt as he watches from afar in growing admiration. There's a measure of redemption in Yun's self-sacrifice, a turn toward the light when it matters most. If Kyle chooses the dark side, Yun's contempt for him grows, and the brutality with which Kyle has carved a path toward Jarek justifies Yun's hatred. Kyle becomes another threat to dispatch, a rival to his master, and Yun's brief doubt in his path is dispelled by the swelling darkness. None of this is explicitly stated, but that's the joy of filling the narrative blanks. It isn't a leap of logic so much as a logical conclusion based on the characteristics which Yun presents. I like this detail, and I've always had a soft spot for Yun. Kyle descends into the Valley of the Jedi and is confronted by the Twi'lek Bok, played by actor Time Winters.
This is gonna cost you a crate load of money you don't have.
As long as I'm around to pay you, I don't care.
My sentiments exactly.
Mine too!
Bok is a twisted individual, and Time's portrayal of the character is playfully dark.
Such a bad fall. But you'll be glad to know I found your lightsaber. Want it? Very distinctive.
Oh!
Not so distinctive now, is it?
Enough of this!
Bok is my favourite Dark Jedi because of his warped mind. Bok has been so twisted by the dark power he wields that it manifests physically in his movement and perverts his perception of reality. This is fully realised as, when Kyle defeats him, Bok continues to laugh until, in his final gasping breaths, he realises that he's dying. Time Winters has significant acting chops and already had a solid acting career before Jedi Knight. His energy iconizes Bok among the Dark Jedi of Jarek's cabal. With Bok out of the way, and with Jan rescued in the Lightside story, Kyle confronts Jarek for the climactic showdown. Jarek has bathed in the Valley's power, intimating that this will be a tough fight. The reality, as I've discussed, is quite different. One thing I haven't mentioned previously is that Jarek has the ability to heal all damage. Once Kyle has whittled Jarek's health to a fraction, Jarek retreats to bathe in the Valley's power. If Kyle isn't quick enough to finish him, Jarek recovers his full strength and the fight continues. This is the only tangible presentation of Jarek's increased power from bathing in the Valley. Recall what Ran said about the Valley's power.
If Jarek captures this power, he will be a creature such as the universe has never seen. A supernova of stars in a fleeting thought. the eradication of life from a star system, in a whisper, will be within his power.
Here's what we're told about Jarek.
Jarek has the uncanny power to absorb and overshadow one's connection to the Force, like a dark cloud. A deep, empowering grasp of your will is what you need.
Sounds like a rough guy. Here's how the fight actually plays out. Kyle's ability to wield the Force is unimpeded. The dark cloud, which stifles a Jedi's connection to the Force, has seemingly lifted for Kyle. Jarek also never uses the strange ability seen in the opening cutscene. It appears as though Jarek has become weaker, not stronger. The unique strength of video games as a storytelling medium is to convey story through the narrative of gameplay. Jarek is strong, we're told, on the same level as Vader, according to the manual. This fight, on a narrative level, contradicts that information. Jarek does nothing which we haven't seen other Dark Jedi do. He swings his lightsaber faster and takes a longer beating, but he never uses a power we haven't seen before, nothing which elevates him above his minions. Jarek is a tough fight if tackled conventionally, head-on, but his power is underwhelming. Jedi Knight has two predictably polar endings. Darkside Kyle slays Jarek and takes the valley's power for himself. With no one left to challenge, Kyle becomes the new Lord Emperor of the Imperial Order, with Saris as his second in command. He plays his father's recording one last time before crushing it under his boot, a symbolism which is hard to watch. Despite the high production ending for the dark side, there's no music in the end credits crawl. Was this an oversight or intentional to force the player to dwell on their actions? Thankfully, the dark side ending isn't canonical. Lightside Kyle defeats Jarek in combat. Jarek tries to goad Kyle into killing him for a last desperate attempt for Kyle's soul, and when that fails, Jarek rushes him in a rage. Kyle cuts him down, which unleashes a burst of Force energy. The scene ends with Kyle carving statues of Morgan and Ran into the valley to honor their sacrifice, a fitting cap to the adventure. Kinda poetic that Jarek became part of the power he sought to hoard. Lead designer Justin Chin drew inspiration from numerous sources for Jedi Knight's story. He carefully studied George Lucas's inspirations for the original Star Wars movies while drafting the plot. Lucas was known to have researched ancient Asian history and culture, and Chin followed this line of thought. The Seven Samurai, a cult classic movie which is highly regarded in cinema, was of particular curiosity to Lucas. It coined the template of a disparate group of heroes brought together to fight a common evil. Chin flipped this ethos and transposed the Seven Samurai as the bad guys. Jarek's blindness draws parallels with a classic character of Japanese cinema, Zatoichi, the blind swordsman. The whimsical premise of the blind swordsman is that a lack of sight augments Zatoichi's other senses, gifting him exceptional swordsmanship. Jarek's blindness was inspired by this idea. Chin cites another seemingly unlikely movie as inspiration for Jedi Knight's plot. You might have heard of it, a quaint little film called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Man, that sounds like home for some reason. The pursuit of a mythical treasure appealed to Chin, and he wanted to work this into the plot, which became the Valley of the Jedi. I'm going to butcher this name, and I apologize in advance. Vez Borkman, a programmer for Jedi Knight, said that Kyle was designed to mirror the Become a Jedi hero's journey of Luke Skywalker, and that the goal of the game was to immerse the player in the Star Wars universe as the hero of the story. I found Vez's statements after forming this analysis. I'd say they align well with the findings, don't you? Jedi Knight's plot was deeply personal for Chin, owing to his relationship with his then-deceased father, a theme which also grounded Jason Court in his role as Kyle Katarn. The guidance, support, and love of a parent or mentor is a powerful motivator for story characters. It's powerful because it resonates. Stories about family connection are timeless, will always be timeless, because the family unit is the simplest and most comfortable social group for many. Kyle's story, while told with bombast and flair, is a story of redemption. We're shown a strong, confident protagonist early on, but Kyle is driven by a destructive desire for revenge. His motives are impulsive and self-serving, and not in line with his father's wishes or the Jedi Code. Kyle's anger mounts as the adventure unfolds until it finally boils over, resulting in the execution of Maw. In that horrible moment, Kyle realizes that it isn't justice for his father's death which is at stake, but the battle for his morality. Even the Valley of the Jedi pales in comparison to such a personal conflict. That's why it must be resolved before Kyle meets Jarek. or Kyle loses the battle regardless of who falls. Some thumb their nose at this story and the simplicity of its beats, but I believe they are dismissive of the underlying message, which is deeply and sadly ironic. A study of morality and personal values requires willing introspection and an application of hard questions to oneself. The true message of Jedi Knight is that doing the right thing is often the hardest of choices. This fundamental humane truth is repeated often in stories, not because it's an easy trope to speak to, but because it's one people constantly fail at. Look online to the mindless screeching, at the gaping void of personal accountability, at the utter absence of logic and truth, or even the core components of what could be considered structured thought. How many of these clamoring voices, desperately clambering over one another for a moment at the pulpit, fall silent long enough to listen to the inner monologue, to inquire if they live by the moral values they demand of others, to recognize their own cyclic and destructive patterns? It's easy to clap back, but two wrongs don't make a right, as the old saying goes. It's harder to take the right path, to reserve judgment, to not mindlessly dive onto the pile of writhing bodies as they smother another opinion. Actions separate the quality of virtue from mere platitude. If we can learn anything from Jedi Knight, it's that the battle for personal morality is won in degrees and not at a defining moment in time. It's the small things, the simple acts of kindness and restraint, which define the strength of character required to weather life's storm. It suggests that one must seek to be more than they are of their own accord. It isn't up to someone else to uphold their standards. The hypocrite speaks, the virtuous does. This is the code of the Jedi, not grand battles and clashes with evil. Those may be necessary at times, but they don't distinguish a Jedi from their dark counterpart. Kyle's connection to his father, the theme of family, is merely the vessel for this message. My friend from the beginning of the video also points out an interesting observation about the Jedi battles. Moore's unfortunate divorce with his legs, and Bok and Pick's frenzied jumping went on to appear in Lucas's prequel trilogy. Perhaps, despite himself, Lucas paid closer attention to this more violent interpretation of Star Wars than he cared to admit. Kyle is an excellent protagonist for this story. Strong, capable, driven, yet flawed. This is thanks in no small part to Jason Court, whose swarthy visage brought the character to life, and whose acting delivered some memorable moments. Jason was filmed against a blue screen, and I empathise with how tough it must have been talking to a light stand and pretending that it was a sinister robot holding the key to the galaxy inside its rusted head. There are other standout performances from the cast, and yes, there are raw moments, but the acting isn't consistently bad. The unbridled hate that Jedi Knight's cutscenes get is unfounded and makes it seem as though every frame is riddled with poor acting, plot holes, bad CGI, and every other production sin under the sun. Be mindful of when Jedi Knight came out and the production quality of other games at the time. Jedi Knight was ahead in that category, broadly speaking, by a long margin. That said, some of Kyle's in-game lines are delivered in the wrong tone. For example, this is what Kyle says when he receives the lightsaber from Ouija.
Let's see what this saber can do.
There's nothing wrong with the line, but it's too upbeat. Kyle just watched a secret recording from his dead father who entrusted him with a lightsaber and the burden of the galaxy's safety. He didn't find a tasty pastry in his pocket. A falling tonation, instead of a rising one, would fit this line better, as it impresses a seriousness for the events which just took place. Kyle's personality bleeds through other in-game lines, which help to reinforce the pioneering aspect of Jedi Knight's ambitious level design.
There's gotta be a better way to make this.
The most potent lines are the ones which pass judgment on the player's decision to steer Kyle directly into danger.
I hope this is a good idea. I could be flash fried in a second down here.
I stated earlier that Kyle is a vessel for the Jedi power fantasy, which was a mirror of Luke's journey. This might be true on the surface, but Kyle's arc is darker than Luke's, and their journeys never gain parity. Luke is naive, altruistic, and inexperienced. His arc is the classic hero's journey, as defined by Joseph Campbell. There's a purity to Luke's rise into the mantle of Jedi. He makes costly mistakes, but his goal is always to protect those he loves. Kyle's journey isn't as clean. He's seen the gritty underside of the galaxy, knows how it tastes and smells and feels between the fingers. He begins the story seeking revenge for his father's death. Even when the story shifts gears, Kyle still harbors anger and resentment toward Jarek, bottled and amplified by his father's wishes that Kyle use the lightsaber for good. Kyle feels guilt that he wasn't there for his father, and that he was naive in believing the Empire's lies about Morgan's death. He has carried that guilt ever since, and it has been a constant roadblock to purging the darkness on his soul. Kyle's character arc is redemptive as he confronts his darkness and discovers renewed purpose in life. Is it any wonder fans are drawn to him? We're also ignoring the narrative implication of Kyle's sudden Force awakening and meteoric rise to Force competency. Rey doesn't get a pass, and neither does Kyle. There's no narrative explanation for it, nor could there be. It's ridiculous. But Jedi Knight is a game designed to emulate Luke's hero journey, and it had to be condensed. Kyle's struggle is marked in other ways, and I'll happily suspend my disbelief on this point. Perhaps more time passes than we realize. Perhaps Ran's ghost trains Kyle. I don't care. Kyle Katarn is an endearing and enduring character in Star Wars lore. Even now, many years after Jedi Knight's release, fans pine for Kyle's return. While Kyle's journey began with Dark Forces, it would take Jedi Knight to catapult him into revered EU canon. Jason Court played no small part in the iconic Katarn look. Kyle's in-game model lacks the godly beard, and the developers admitted their mortal sin and said that the character model was created before Jason was hired. Despite this, the bearded face and breezy mid-cropped hair is the image which persists throughout the rest of the franchise. Kyle's popularity is niche, even among Star Wars fans. He exists at the boundary of acceptance and obscurity, just beyond the light, but not fully in darkness. The limelight is a fitting symbology for the character and how time has unkindly forgot Kyle's place in Star Wars canon. I hope that one day, that will change. One of the reasons I buy from Good Old Games, the Steam Alternative Games platform, is because they're DRM free. You get a fully packaged game which can be downloaded, installed, and played completely offline. It's yours to own forever. Fuck you, Epic! Another reason is because they sometimes include manuals and game soundtracks for free. Yet another is because they always have good sales and reasonable prices. If this is sounding like a shameless plug for GOG, then wait for this next kicker. GOG have established themselves as the guys who make old games run on new systems. No futzing with DOSBox, no modifying any files or slathering the game in community patches just to see a main menu. Aside from being DRM free, this is the biggest reason I support GOG. Occasionally they get it wrong though, and Jedi Knight is one example. It'll install, it'll run, it'll even play cutscenes, but it doesn't render the game. All I saw when I loaded in was a black screen. The game was running, I could hear things I was doing, but I couldn't see. If this is the new hardcore mode, I want out. Luckily, a quick Google search revealed that this was a common problem with Jedi Knight. Armed with this knowledge, I put on my big boy pants and searched for a solution. Thankfully, someone had done the legwork and compiled a step-by-step guide. A link to the guide is in the video description. Follow the instructions to get GOG's version of Jedi Knight working. Now, I have no idea what the Steam version is like, but there's no harm in trying this fix if you're having the same issue there. There's also a link to a fix for the background music if it doesn't play, which is another common issue. And if the screen has borders when running in full screen, maximize the view size in the menu. The only other issue with the GOG version was the soundtrack falling silent when a track finished. It starts again if you enter then exit the menu, but I couldn't find a fix for this issue. These fixes give you Jedi Knight as it was back in the day, more or less. Blurry textures, blocky character models. I understand that it can be underwhelming for gamers who grew up with GTA 5 as the baseline for visuals. Lucky for you, I have a solution. You've no doubt noticed that some footage looks pretty damn good. That was taken while running a lovely community mod. Introducing Jedi Knight Remastered. JKR contains enhancements including an FOV slider, improved lighting, and a larger HUD, but the big ticket items are improved textures and better models. Sexy. No. JKR is a self-contained installer, though you will need the original game files to run it. I've got you covered there. Don't forget to check the video description for GOG links to Jedi Knight and Mysteries of the Sith. JKR is still being worked on, but I only encountered a few issues worth mentioning. First, Ouija isn't textured and looks horrible. Second, there's no weapon sway in first-person mode while running. I hope this isn't a deliberate exclusion because I love Jedi Knight's weapon sway. It has a great feel of momentum when paired with Kyle's footsteps. Third, a door didn't trigger in the late game, which prevented me from progressing. I was able to cheese the ATST through the door, and strangely, this triggered the door to open. It may be an issue in the original game too, but it wasn't something that happened in my unmodded playthrough. That's it. That's my extensive list. Jedi Knight Remastered is so good that I won't play without it. Please add weapon sway. And I'll even say that new players should use JKR as their baseline experience. It's that good. There's a link to Jedi Knight Remastered in the description. With the vitriol level that fandoms these days, it's nice to see an example of the positive influence that fan passion and hard work produces. We seem to forget that. There's also a remaster mod for Mysteries of the Sith. It was less complete, so I didn't use it. The remaster looks great, but I have a final surprise. This is the Jedi Knight Remake project, headed by Repertal. The remake uses the power of Unreal Engine to reimagine Jedi Knight in gritty high fidelity. This is Nar Shaddaa like you've never seen it. On top of being an obvious leap in graphics, the remake flushes the environment with detail. Detritus is scattered through the streets, and areas that were once open nothing are immaculately detailed. The AI is given a boost and does a better job of pathfinding and pursuing Kyle. The blaster rifle now comes with a scope attached, and additional secrets and Easter eggs incentivize exploration, even for veteran players. The remake is in early development. Only the double cross at Nar Shaddaa level is playable, though a horde mode exists to mess around in. There were issues too, which I hope are addressed in future updates. There's no always run option in the settings. For a game where you run 99% of the time, that's a problem. Having to hold the run key for the entire level was a pain in the ass. This is compounded by the second issue. The remake feels more ponderous to control. Here's the acceleration and movement speed between the original and the remake. The difference is distinct, especially having come from the original straight into the remake. This is a big deal because Kyle's speed forms part of the power fantasy. Reducing player acceleration makes fights and maneuvers more frustrating. I don't need to play Jedi Knight to feel frustrated. Finally, there's no reaction to landing on angled slopes. This was also a function of exploration in the original game. The player slides downward if they land on angled slopes. This simple mechanic meant that platforming required more care. It's also a feature that you don't see often in games, and it makes Jedi Knight's control feel distinct. I hope it's included in future updates. These issues aside, the Jedi Knight remake is promising and well worth your time. The remake is currently free to download from Repertal's Patreon at the time of this recording. There's a link to it in the description. Regardless of whether Night Dive Studios might apply their talented strokes to a Jedi Knight remaster, it's nice to know that the community, once again, have things in order. Jedi Knight took the broad concept of Star Wars space opera and extrapolated it into a video game, working with and around the limitations of technology to present George Lucas's vision intact and tonally accurate. It cultivated a different design ethos which distinguished it from the typical corridor shooters of the era. Jedi Knight opened levels and gifted them a life rarely seen in games of the time. Force powers and the lightsaber created an evolving combat loop which players hadn't experienced like this before, further distinguishing Jedi Knight from its peers. The glowing praise from media outlets, players and fans alike cemented Jedi Knight as a critical success and a blueprint for future Jedi titles. It spearheaded the introduction of Jedi in gaming culture, riding the zeitgeist of Star Wars popularity to deliver what fans had long been waiting for. The story, while simple, was on brand and iconically Star Wars in theme, setting and message, and this combination built a timeless place in the hearts of many. The characters were larger than life, the stakes were galactic, and the hero was relatable and easy to root for. Jedi Knight's full-motion cutscenes were some of the coolest in the industry, so much so that Blizzard allegedly complimented the team and said that Jedi Knight's cutscenes would be held by Blizzard as a benchmark of quality in their future titles. Say what you want about Blizzard, but their cutscenes have always been a chef's kiss. Jedi Knight's development team had a clear vision from the beginning, to tell a great story simply and to immerse players in the fantasy of being a Jedi Knight. They hit these targets with unerring accuracy, and their passion for their craft and for Star Wars as a cultural phenomenon is undeniable. This was a labor of love made by fans of Star Wars. This is what's achievable with an earnest love for the source material and the respect to adhere to it as closely as possible, an ethos which is exceedingly rare in modern day. I'm disappointed by some videos which cover older games like Jedi Knight. They're often absent the cultural impact or critical reception which the game had at the time. They use modern design to measure gameplay against standards which either didn't exist or weren't comparable for the time. Some barely mention, if mention at all, the technical limitations of the era and how that affected game design. It's easy to spot these videos. Many points are ripped from wiki articles and lack context, examples, or talking points to back whatever claim is made. Much like engaging a modern game on its own terms, there should be an attempt to engage the game on the terms as they existed when it released. Much of a game's cultural footprint, like Jedi Knight, are a combination of factors which define how it became successful. At best, omitting these points doesn't credit the game its due. At worst, it's blatant misrepresentation. Don't go anywhere because the Mysteries of the Sith section is coming right up. Mysteries of the Sith is the official expansion pack for Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. I realized that the term expansion pack is old vernacular, so to put it in perspective, imagine you bought DLC which was almost the same length as the base game and added new mechanics and engine tweaks for a third the price of the original game, which is roughly worth a couple of DLC now. An expansion pack was like 8 heavyweight DLC rolled into a single package. Talk about generosity. The biggest change in Mysteries of the Sith is on the box art. This fiery soul is Mara Jade, the new protagonist. I'll cover Mara later, but the takeaway is that fans were running the show again. If Jedi Knight was developed by passionate Star Wars fans, then Mysteries of the Sith was developed by hardcore Star Wars nerds who were so immersed in the expanded universe that it's a miracle they remembered to eat. A love of Star Wars was expected of many who worked on the game. Kevin Schmidt, Mystery of the Sith's lead level designer, had a car with the number plates MTFBEWY. To say that he was a devout superfan is an understatement. Kevin was in his element with Mysteries of the Sith, as he now had an outlet for his encyclopedic knowledge of the Star Wars universe. In Kevin's words, quote, "We would often spread the resource material all over the floor and look for ideas and ways to tie things into the existing Star Wars universe. Since I had such a passion for it, I thought I owed it to the franchise to stay as true to the source material as possible. I was in heaven." End quote. In the current age of lazy writing, spurned legacies, and flippant lore subversion, this quote is anathema. The team drew inspiration from the explosion of new novels which mined the rich storytelling potential of the expanded universe. Talon Card, Mara's employer made famous by Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire novel trilogy, is mentioned in the manual and in the game. He was an obscure character that only well-read fans would be able to identify. Mara Jade was no different back then either, a fresh character in the Star Wars EU canon. I read all the Star Wars novels from the 90s and I recognized the names, creatures and species which the team drew into the game. I was thrilled. It was confirmation that fans were in control and that we, the gamers, were in good hands. Obscure lore was one aspect of the new changes. Force power selection was overhauled and expanded. Gone was the distinct light and dark powers. Now, players could choose powers without the crushing weight of morality. Powers were graded into tiers, and players could unlock a limited number of powers per tier. The plot demanded the use of certain powers during the game, and 4 stars were automatically spent to acquire them as needed. The development team wanted more cinematic moments in the game, akin to spectacles like the Hoth Assault in The Empire Strikes Back. Mysteries of the Sith was packed with set pieces, assaults, and climactic battles to engage players. There was a greater attention to detail in each space, and coloured lighting, the rage at the time, made a debut in the Jedi engine. Mysteries of the Sith had a marked impact on high-functioning medium too.
The Mysteries of the Sith expansion was everything Jedi Knight was and more. Better and more versatile force powers, with a couple of the useless ones omitted, the ability to play as Mara Jade, a very creepy story that took you to abandoned Sith temples inhabited by horrifying things like 8 men and invisible creatures. It was all so extra, so much more atmospheric, and yet, again, just felt like something the main canon hadn't quite nailed as well as of yet, and it totally justified its existence and nailed its concept in its first try. Mysteries of the Sith is freaky, it's even more refined and fun because of the enhanced horsepower suite, and it's truly one of the best expansions I've ever played. But the reason why isn't just the campaign.
The Force Power suite is a huge improvement. We'll get to that soon. The team had a tight turnaround, less than 12 months until release. Some members had just finished work on Outlaws, another LucasArts shooter. The budget was as tight as my waistline, meaning there would be heavy compromises. Like my waistline. Furthermore, the Lucasfilm licensing arm restricted what the team was allowed to include in the game. Characters from the movies were a no-go, as were new Sith Lords for Mara to battle. The developers were forced to slip crazy ideas into proposals to make their preferred ideas seem reasonable. They also got creative with assets, making new species, like the Ithorians, by modifying existing character models. Many in the development team had worked with the Jedi engine on previous projects and knew it well, and this was a huge contributor in their ability to squeeze a full-fledged expansion out of 10 months. It's amazing what passionate and knowledgeable developers who are at the top of their game were able to achieve in a short time. Mysteries of the Sith, which I'll call Sith from now on, begins with a bang. Literally. This scene of stormtroopers flooding a rebel base is the development team's cinematic dream come reality. And this is the first of many cinematic examples. The influence of Star Wars movies knit the set pieces into a familiar, cozy experience. It's immediately apparent that Sith is a different game, an evolution of Jedi Knight's environmental storytelling. The fast bits are faster and the slow bits are slower. Scenes now have colour and texture, and they change in new, interesting ways. Sith is Jedi Knight squared. The appeal of Sith, as a fan, is the fan service. Star Wars fans are well serviced, and the power fantasy of a benevolent Jedi is more complex and nuanced this time around. There's a philosophical layer to wielding the Force this time. Sith is crammed with new weapon features. The best one is the lightsaber keybound to 1 instead of 0, which makes switching to the lightsaber less painful on the psyche and on the hand. Mara rocks a Blastech DL-44, the pistol which Han Solo made famous. It can charge a shot for respectable damage. The Stormtrooper rifle gets a sniper scope secondary fire, which is a godsend. A flash bomb grenade temporarily blinds enemies, and Mara if she's careless. A Seeker rail detonator fires homing rockets, which are as fun as they sound. Manual sequencer charges allow Mara to place charges and detonate them manually with a handheld detonator. A carbonite gun freezes enemies in place, which can then be shattered like the T-1000. Repeating blaster cannons in select maps provide moments of cinematic flair as Mara vaporizes enemies and vehicles. Only 3 weapons are untouched from Jedi Knight: the bowcaster, repeater rifle, and concussion rifle. That's an impressive number of additional weapons for an expansion pack. Kyle Katarn returns for a brief stint as protagonist. Kyle is now an esteemed Jedi, and the early levels controlling Kyle are a sandbox for players to experiment with the new tiered Force powers. It's a taste of power early on, a teaser of the journey to come while pushing the dramatic opening onward. Players switch to Mara Jade after a few levels, and the glut of power is gone. Mara's journey as a Jedi is the perfect vehicle to drive gameplay, giving Force power progression a credible reason to exist. It also fits neatly within the expanded universe, something which the development team needed to pay careful attention to, lest Lucasfilm bear down with the cudgel. Kyle compliments Mara on her training in the opening cutscene, but it's clear from the moment you take control that she has a long road ahead. Kyle's encouragement before he jets off is merely a waxing of a faded paint. Sith's combat is more difficult than Jedi Knight's. Enemies do more damage, health is harder to find, and you're more likely to see clinch situations where health is low and the way forward is earned in degrees of tactical caution. Enemies are more deviously placed, which makes surprise attacks that much more deadly. Some new enemies in Sith will end Mara in a single attack, and others attack so quickly that the pain animation can stunlock Mara into the grave. They'll hide behind pillars, pounce from height, and wring from the player a greater consideration from the surrounding environment. Disarmed enemies now punch Mara, a new feature which was uncommon enemy behavior in games of the time. The most significant change in Sith is the structure of Force powers. Gone are the light, dark, and neutral distinctions. Instead, powers are ranked by tier, and the player chooses a limited number of powers from each. They can all be chosen guilt-free, which lets players focus on having fun. This freeform structure is more palatable for experimentation and customized builds, yet maintains the narrative plausibility of Mara's moral arc. Kyle too, for that matter, who had his own struggles with the dark side. The game auto-assigns Force stars to specific powers during the campaign, which are required for Force-oriented puzzles. This approach is more flexible than Jedi Knight's complete freedom, and is more personalized than successor Jedi Outcast, which has preset unlocks. Of all the Jedi games, I like this approach to Force powers the most, as it offers mechanical flexibility when working in puzzles without compromising player choice. I wish future Jedi games had used it. Cool new powers join the roster. Projection, push, saber throw, farsight, and chain lightning complement the staples from Jedi Knight, providing further options for greatly diverse builds. Stars are earned in the same way as Jedi Knight, at the completion of levels and for finding all secrets in a level. Mara's power arc follows a similar curve to Kyle's from Jedi Knight. Stars are incrementally earned and spent to improve the breadth and potency of Mara's force power. Unlike Jedi Knight's open star assignment, Sith limits how many unique powers can be unlocked for each tier. No playthrough will unlock all powers. This encourages a focus on the player's preferred playstyle. Hell, you could go Commando if you really wanted. No combination is invalid because the powers needed for puzzle solving are automatically unlocked. The mental breathing space this simple change provides is palpable and welcome. Let's take an aside to consider how Mysteries of the Sith could have included immersive sim design based around force powers. It has the perfect gameplay systems for this format when compared to future contemporaries Deus Ex and System Shock 2. You could find the key to open the door, or you could force push the unlock button inside the room, or you could saber throw or chain lightning through the gap in the window to trigger the button. When I consider how force powers could have been used in Sith, I'm a little sad that they weren't applied this way. If the developers had more time and budget, they could have crafted an amazing force-based ImSim template for future Jedi games to mine. Back to reality though. The power curve in Sith feels more earned than Jedi Knight thanks to the increased difficulty. Mara struggles against tougher enemies, punishing odds, and her fledgling Jedi powers. There's a point in the late game which significantly dulls the sharp progression with a blunt force difficulty spike. I'll cover that later. Suffice it to say that Mara is tested and it isn't entirely inappropriate, though it's not completely satisfying thanks to poor difficulty pacing. What a good segue into Sith's level design. The most noticeable upgrade to Sith's level design is colored lighting. That's covered soon, but it was an impressive upgrade at the time. New security cameras and monitoring stations allowed players to survey and plan ahead. It was a great feature, likely taking inspiration from Duke Nukem 3D, which had its own robust camera system. It's a fine inclusion, but it's rarely used in a transformative or clever way, and I've always believed that they could have done more with this, especially around solving puzzles. A single disguise section appears early in Mara's journey and is a subtle nod to the notion that Mara's path is different from Kyle's. Its use reads more like fan service to the original movies than a meaningful mechanic though. It doesn't stop random attacks while active, and it's unreliable enough that the saber or blaster is a more effective deterrent. There's no penalty for breaking disguise either, narratively or mechanically, which makes it a shallow prop to justify Mara's access to a restricted area. The disguise is a great idea which never reaches beyond a shallow execution. Drop into the comments and let me know what you think about the disguise. Perhaps I've overlooked something important. There were other cool features like breakable glass, anti-gravity sections, and levers which could be manipulated by force pull. It's a crazy number of additions considering the limited time the team had. I admire the ambition and attention to authenticity which clearly drove these decisions. These features gave Sith a flavor wholly unlike Jedi Knight, yet nourishing in its own way. Sith used Mara's restless personality to justify jetting her around the galaxy. She makes deals with a Huttese crime lord, tracks a criminal through a bustling spaceport, fights off pirate invaders on a rebel ship, confronts the fearsome Rancor while weaponless, heists a holocron from a crook's art collection, and wades through the swamps of a nowhere planet in search of Kyle. The galaxy hopping maintains a fresh cycle of scenery with new challenges, enemies, and interesting locations to poke into. There are many great levels in Sith, but the Kotrassi spaceport is a standout. It's playfully crafted and condenses much of the campaign-wide design into 2 levels. Kotrassi feels alive in a way that Baron's Head from Jedi Knight grasps for, yet can't quite reach. The streets are vertical, which makes Force Jump a valuable power, and the rambling streets branch into alternate paths and hubs, an explorer's wet dream. Shops line the streets, and civilians cautiously rub shoulders with stormtroopers under the gaudy neon proclamation of a locale which demands attention. The docked ships in the surrounding hangars will be familiar to any Star Wars fan. Colored lighting makes everything pop and draws the eye to points of interest. Most importantly, Force powers can flex. Force Jump is an obvious choice for this area, but speed, persuasion, and push prove their value. Kotrassi isn't the only memorable level, but as a vertical slice of Sith, it's damn delicious. The smoke and mirrors of Sith occasionally part, like this doorway which Kyle disappears through. The story implies that he heads deeper into the Sith ruins, but a check of the map using Force Sight reveals him on the other side, pacing like a caged bull. Or the Vornska model, which looks fine at ground level but looks like a slotted cardboard toy from above. I highlight these to showcase the economy which the developers used to meet their deadline. One of Sith's cooler achievements was the inclusion of many Star Wars assets, which are used to invoke a richer Star Wars experience. Details like an astromech droid which overrides a lock, an interrogation droid, ship mainstays like the Corellian freighter docked at port. There's even a droid ballet to discover. The Star Wars lexicon is strong with this one. The detail is more than fan service, it's used to sell the locations. The ghostly war cry of Tusken Raidos echo ominously through the canyons on the approach to Karpar's palace, giving the canyons a foreboding feel. The numerous watering holes are alive with the tinkle of drinks being poured. The Rebel Corvette offers grand views of the exterior, displaying the ship in its entirety while the space battle rages outside. Sith builds upon Jedi's open space by condensing it a touch and flashing it with detail. The Jedi engine and PC technology limited what the developers could do, so what they did achieve in embellishing Mara's journey was damn impressive. Remember, distance fog was common at the time to circumvent hardware limitations. I mention this because I read a criticism of the texture work in empty areas. Quote, "Starting off by infiltrating a Hutt's palace, you'll proceed to a spaceport, a ship, a New Republic Corvette, and a pirate stronghold. The level design throughout this portion of the game is rather plain, with lots of large single-texture walls and big empty rooms. Some of the wall textures are even quite poor, particularly the brick walls in the courtyards of Karpar the Hutt's palace." End quote. None of this design was out of place at the time. Hell, Jedi Knight was less than a year old and exhibited much of this design. These comments may have spoken to the rapidly improving fidelity of games during the era, but the critique doesn't hold water. Colored lighting is the most dramatic engine upgrade from Jedi Knight. It was the Spice Girls of effects at the time, new, popular, and sexy, and many developers filled their games with oversaturated, gaudy lighting. Sith largely avoided the misplaced highlights, opting for colors which enhanced mood and theme. From the subtle orange glow of the Rebel base and the mossy underground highlights to the sinister reds, purples, and blues of the Sith Temple, lighting is applied with narrative care. Colored lighting is what I recall most vividly when I think of Mysteries of the Sith. Here's 2 lines from Emil Pagliarulo and his A-Vault review to support my point. Quote, "While not as graphically outstanding as Quake 2 or even GL Quake, Mysteries of the Sith features great direct 3D accelerated graphics and loads more textures than Jedi Knight. The addition of colored lighting is much appreciated and really adds ambience to the environments." End quote. Here's another quote from GameSpot's review. Quote, "Although not nearly as impressive as the lighting effects in Quake 2, Sith's added color helps to create a more immersive and sinister atmosphere all around." End quote. Let's shed light on something else. Puzzles. Sith's approach to puzzle solving is ambitious. That's a kind word, isn't it? Jedi Knight had some obscure solutions, but Sith challenges players to stick their head in the stratosphere more frequently. Mara sometimes utters a thought on what to do next, but the player is mostly left inside their own head. Sometimes the solution is as simple as retrieving an item. Other times, you'll need to damage a piece of equipment so that a worker comes out to fix it and leaves the door open. Or you might need to blast a switch inside a door from a distance so that the door doesn't close when you approach. You're welcome for that tip. I've finished this game numerous times and I still got stuck while recording this video. These moments dragged out the wrath of the harsh critic, even though puzzles like this weren't uncommon at the time. Conversely, there were moments like cleverly drawing a turret's fire to disable a shield, or using foreseeing to bypass sentinel statues on Drummond Cass. Those puzzles felt rewarding and fun to figure out. The majority of Sith's puzzles are quickly overcome, it's the odd handful which cause issues. The problem isn't the puzzles, so much as the player is never taught to think in ways which lead to the solution, either through normal gameplay or as incremental logic stepping stones which build up to the main puzzle. For example, let's examine the door puzzle on the Imperial asteroid. The player eventually learns by observation that the door closes when Kyle approaches. Kyle even comments about needing to find a way past the door, indicating to the player that they're focusing on a legitimate puzzle. The problem is that nowhere prior has the player been required to shoot switches to open doors, nor have they seen panels like this one to know that they can be shot. Even though the problem is clearly presented, the player hasn't been trained to see the solution. This is where confusion and annoyance invariably set in. I'd wager that examples like this are why modern developers, broadly speaking, are adverse to creative puzzle solving in their games. Puzzles are great, Creative puzzles are better. Nintendo often employ this technique in their first-party games, showcasing a character ability using simple puzzles, then ramping the difficulty by forcing players to think creatively about that ability. Solutions don't have to be bulletproof, but they shouldn't be a stone-cold surprise. Whether you enjoy the puzzles shakes down to an understanding that you'll need to not only pay attention, but that you're expected to play with the powers given. There's the odd puzzle which isn't well telegraphed, but Sith is so ambitious and puzzles are usually overcome with a little elbow grease that I can't bring myself to be as critical as I know I could be. I love a good linear shooter, but I'll take this, with its dash of secret sauce, over a copy-pasta job any day of the week. As true then as it is now. Escapist magazine had something to say about Sith's secrets. Quote, "The decision to tie bonus upgrade points for your powers to finding secret areas is a good idea with middling execution." End quote. The article doesn't elaborate how the execution was middling, but this was one of my gripes as well, so I'll opine. Secrets are a natural way to test Mara's perception and Jedi abilities, and it makes perfect narrative sense that her Force ability grows as a result of finding these places. The majority of Force-locked secrets, however, predominantly need Force jump. The developers could have tied at least some secrets to mandatory powers. They should have also expanded the pool of required powers to increase puzzle diversity. This approach would have provided greater narrative reasoning for Mara's growing power, and it would have made players appreciate Force powers more. Perhaps powers should have been graphically split at the power selection screen. One group for utility, the timed unlocks, and custom powers which the player picks. Control of unlocks gives the developers greater flexibility in how they implement puzzles and secrets because they know when and what players can use. Not that they didn't already, but this knowledge isn't used to maximal effect. I forgive Jedi Knight for this deficiency because the goal was to allow players the freedom to pick their own Force powers, to play out the hero fantasy. Some secrets in Jedi Knight are built around Force powers, jump in particular, but it was impossible for the developers to add Force-based puzzles when they couldn't be certain that players had picked a specific power. Sith deliberately shifts to controlled Force power unlocks, but these powers are required sparingly until Drummond Cass. And isn't this a great segue into Drummond Cass? The planet of Drummond Cass is the climax of Mara's journey, the big O, the destination. Drummond Cass is more than endgame though. It's a tonal shift from light-hearted galaxy-trotting tourist to an oppressive lightning-racked swamp. Ancient secrets lay buried among the vines and muck, and Mara's unease is conveyed through voiced thought.
Charming place. I guess I should get this over with.
Conventional weapons don't work here, and Mara must rely on her lightsaber, Force powers, and wits to overcome Drummond Cass's treacherous terrain. The jungle is a damp, rotting shroud which squeezes from every direction, and the stagnant knee-high water conceals deadly, sucking abysses which welcome a careless step. The jungle is filled with predators, and even the plants want Mara dead. Force-blotting Salamiri smother Mara's connection to the Force, and death is only ever one surprise away. And this is just the swamps. Mara's destination is an ancient Sith temple, swallowed by time and the dark waters, where all manner of trials await the foolish. Coloured lighting and colourful sound effects create a potent and pervasive sense of evil which hovers over Mara, cursing every step. It's masterful and memorable level design which makes full use of all senses to make the player feel the evil weeping from the aged, cracked pores of stone. Undead Sith Lords arise from decrepit tombs, the first Force users to confront Mara. In short, Drummond Cass is the most insidiously hostile place which Mara travels to. Drummond Cass thrusts an abrupt spike in difficulty and is functionally different from previous levels. The absolute reliance on the lightsaber and Force powers drastically changes how the game is played. Many enemies will shred Mara in very short order, and some enemies, like the Vornska or Nogri, can kill Mara with a single attack. Vornskas are particularly brutal as they cause a flinch animation with each hit that prevents Mara from attacking. This makes closed melee risky, but melee may be the only option for players who haven't unlocked ranged Force powers. Difficulty isn't a steady upward progression of tough enemies, a gradual increased reliance on the Force, or even knowledge of what trials await as these levels approach. It's a sudden drastic shift in the fundamental gameplay loop brought forth with no warning, and it pegs the player stone cold between the eyes. Some Jedi builds will hold up better than others, and you'd better hope that you chose your powers wisely or it's gonna get rough. I like the difficulty, even though it needs tweaking. This is what Sith should have built toward. The issue isn't so much difficulty as the poor progression toward it. The leap from Holocron Recovery to Sith Temple is a big one, and when the game's difficulty has been mild up to this point, it's clear that pacing has failed. There are also few options to circumvent or overcome fights. Melee combat is punished by enemies with quick or unblockable attacks, and if saber combat is your only option, then save scumming is the most reliable power you have. That ain't cool. I remember defeating Vornskers in previous runs by smoking them with saber throw or force destruction. Saber throw is only good for a few uses though, and force destruction is only good for one use before force mana is depleted. The lightsaber object from saber throw has a large hitbox and frequently clips stuff which cancels the attack and wastes mana. Fights become a war of attrition which drags the game to a standstill. Attempting to avoid threats can cost a handful of reloads to pull off, only to later realize that you'll have to return here again. There are no mandatory powers unlocked which help with these challenges. Players are given a clap on the cheeks and sent to their destiny. So how could drum and cast be improved? Force powers could cost less mana. This would make dealing with threats quicker. Being able to manipulate enemies into traps would provide more options. The most obvious improvement is to give players mandatory powers to help in combat. How about a parry system which, if timed well, not only blocked the attack but caused damage to the attacker? Hell, removing Mara's flinch animation from Vornsker attacks is a solid improvement. I stress again that I love these levels, they're among the best in the game. The occasional frustration is worth the effort, I assure you. The Salamiri creatures are extended universe made flesh. They're a great feature sparingly used, which is disappointing when you consider their potential. They appear in the Dromund-Kar swamps and are often guard secrets, but are rarely used beyond that. Salamiri had the potential to alter combat. They could have been collected as weapons to use against the undead Sith, creating a force bubble which the Sith couldn't cast into. Mara wouldn't be able to cast either, but could still attack with her lightsaber. Vornskers are a natural predator of the Salamiri, and the Salamiri could have been used to bait them so that Mara could sneak past or land a surprise attack. Kinda grim, but they are shaped like sausage rolls, so think of them as a delicious pastry. A few ideas which could have given them greater utility. The path through Dromund-Kar is a force obstacle course. Force seeing is a must, especially at Watcher statues which rise from the water like sentinels. It's a welcome shift which should have reached deeper into the force pool. Puzzles here rarely frustrate once the player knows what's expected, and they're more satisfying to solve than other puzzles because they rely on Mara's Jedi senses, instinct, and force mastery, aspects of her training which have been mute until now. Dromund-Kar is the brutally spectacular cap on Mara's adventures. It's the most ambient and evocative design in Mysteries of the Sith or Jedi Knight, and while its learning curve can be steep, it's absolutely worth the effort. This is a test worth taking, one worthy of a Jedi. Sith's tougher enemies, controlled trickle of force powers, and considered approach to combat paint the same stripes as Jedi Knight, but not the same stride. It's a different beast, and it's not hyperbolic to claim that there's nothing else like it on the market. Authentic fan service is a rare thing, but Sith delivers. And, like all well-designed things, you don't need to be a Star Wars enthusiast to enjoy it. Space wizard powers and giant glow sticks will always be cool and ignite a sense of adventure in anyone. There are a handful of additional issues worth a mention. The collision detection has a slight rebound effect which can make some platforming a pain. Jedi Knight had this too, but there were less situations where it was a problem. It rarely causes issues, but is worth pointing out. The lightsabers hit detection is dicky, another holdover from Jedi Knight, and it sometimes feels like you're waggling a wet pool noodle. This issue feels more prevalent in Sith, which may be related to Mara's flinch animation cancelling attacks. It results in some strikes feeling weightless as they pass through an enemy without damage. It was annoying in Jedi Knight and it's annoying here, but it's never persistent enough to dull the sharp edge of combat. The level aboard the Rebel Corvette has no background music, which is silly because it's one of the more dramatic levels in the game. This robs the level of mood and allows it to lapse into odd stretches of silence. I can't remember if the original disc version had a track for this level or whether it's an issue with GOG's version, but it's someone's oversight. Speaking of music, some tracks don't convey the theme of the levels well. This may have been a cost-saving exercise, recycling tracks from Jedi Knight and putting them to work, but it doesn't always pay off. If there are games which could benefit from dynamic scores, Sith is among them. This was a minor issue, though discordant enough to be noticed. There was also a room which required force pull to cross in what is easily the most contrived puzzle in Sith, existing solely as a blatant puzzle room, no makeup or slim fit dress to try and pretty it up. As much as I advocate for force puzzles, I'm glad there were few like this one. Let's talk about something cool again. I heard rumors of a secret level back in the day. You could supposedly play as Luke Skywalker as he Jedi'd through Bespin. I didn't believe a word of it, but I was wrong. There is indeed a secret Bespin level, but you can't unlock it through conventional play or even a cheat code. The Bespin level wasn't fully implemented and requires the creation of a .jk file to unlock. There's a link to the .jk file contents in the description. All you gotta do is copy the text from the link, paste it into a new notepad file, and save it as a file called episode.jk. Ensure you select all files as the file type. Then, move the file into the Mysteries of the Sith folder under Episode, MOTS Secret Level. Start a new game, select the Episode option to load the Bespin level. Simples! Bespin is 150% fan service. Boba Fett is here chillin', and the iconic round window scene from the Vader fight is here and fully intact, until someone busts the glass, which sucks Luke outside. The devs even included an escape cutscene if Luke tumbles from the iconic platform at the end of the level. There's no climactic Vader fight, but Mara and Kyle confront Luke, and the fight with Mara takes place in a fully functioning carbon freezing chamber. There's an esoteric joke here about Mara blueballing Luke. Don't fall into the chamber. There isn't much to do in this level outside of a few fights. Luke's force powers are weak, and the only way to end the level is to fall from the final platform. It's still awesome that this level exists in the full game and is accessible. The devs were clearly having fun, but I wonder if this level was a soft pitch for what could have been. A shame that Lucasfilm never came to the table, though some of the movie characters made it into Sith's multiplayer as alternate skins. I never played Sith's multiplayer, and it's almost impossible to find a running server, let alone a full one these days. What I uncovered through research, though, was a small but passionate community of players who speak fondly of how fresh the balanced class system and powers felt. Sith innovated on Jedi Knight's Force combat. Sith had 4 classes to choose from, each with varying powers, health, and weapons. Jedi weren't the be-all class and were competently countered by other classes. Each class had multiple skins to choose from. The Jedi class, for instance, had Luke, Vader, Kyle, and Mara skins. How forward-thinking for a time when FPS multiplayer was still basic PvP and team deathmatch, broadly speaking. Sith also featured a unique carrier-style mode called Kill the Fool with the Salamiri. Players jostled to retain the prized Salamiri for as long as they could. Whoever held the Salamiri couldn't use force powers, though no force powers could affect them either. Whoever held it the longest during the time limit was the winner. This game mode was a rip on Kill the Fool with the Chicken in another LucasArts shooter, Outlaws. It's a familiar game mode now, but was uncommon at the time. High-functioning Medium had a lot more experience with multiplayer than I did, so over to you.
The multiplayer was somehow even better. While playing Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 was certainly fun, Mysteries of the Sith was where the game really came into its own. And once I cheated my way through the campaign, I met up with 2 older kids at my church who were best friends, one of whom was the older brother of my best friend whose copy I used to play before I bought my own. Their favorite pastime was playing Jedi Knight multiplayer or Mysteries of the Sith. Loving the campaign as much as I did and wanting to be one of the cool kids, I joined up with them and tried to keep up. They were quite good, I was quite mid, but they kept me around for some reason. Now, I must have played for, a couple years or so, and we ran a clan during that time called the Renegades, or as it would read on screen, R_ and then your username. When I started out, I was Wolverine578, but when I joined the Renegades, I became R_Wolverine. My teammates were tactical assassins, ghost reconning their way through levels as invisible stormtroopers who sniped people and such. We ran train on fools, and it was great. We would join games through a geocities.com website, if you remember that. It would be this little blue or white bubble that you could click on to join, and you'd join based on the criteria listed above that people could just type into like a chat room. It would say stuff like NF sabers, meaning no force powers and only sabers, no guns. So pick your poison. A popular combo that people played was guns and force powers only, no sabers. Popular moves included gripping an opponent and then dragging them over a ledge and dropping them off to their death, or force gripping them and then shooting rockets at their incapacitated body to finish them off. Cool kids would even wear enemies down with gunfire, then wallop that last chunk of health off with a quick swap saber swing. The matches were kinetic, alive, and fascinatingly illuminating about what force combat could actually look like if the movies really cut loose. I was never very good, but I couldn't help but enjoy the rush. And when I eventually wore the game out and took a year-long break, I came back with fresh eyes, but no reflexes. and started in the lowest maintenance match type I could think of, no force sabers. And for some reason, I was a savant. I quickly learned that the trick was to use the camera to your advantage, swinging the saber at your opponent, then angling the camera in the opposite direction as the swing happened, so that your body was the farthest from the enemy's saber, and just the tip of mine was clipping them as they went past, ensuring their death and my escape. I worked it down to a science, and I won countless matches to the point where I was getting banned for supposed hacking. I guess I was one of those sweaty kids who boomers now complain about, and you know what? I'm not sorry. I was a god. And that's honestly the only other game besides Killzone 3 of all things that I've ever been that good at, and I'll always cherish that feeling of growing, of learning to master a thing and then doing it well for a long period of time, albeit a very specific thing.
I can empathize with that. Unreal was my multiplayer drug. 15 multiplayer maps facilitated the force-fueled carnage, with 4 maps restricted to saber-only battles. That's 1 map more than the single-player campaign, and I'm convinced that these guys never slept. Remember, this was an expansion pack, not a standalone game, and they had 10 months to make it. It's disgusting how the most forward-thinking design goes largely unnoticed in favor of more popular titles. Marathon, Bungie's seminal shooter, is another example of unattributed innovation. I've run the Marathon in another video, links in the description if you want to go the distance. That wraps up Sith's gameplay. Let's discuss plot and characters, shall we? We shall. Before I dive in, let's address the elephant in the room. The biggest change to Sith's story is its delivery, which slaps you in the first cutscene. The development team opted for pre-rendered cutscenes instead of the full-motion video seen in Jedi Knight. This was likely due to the tight budget, which is understandable. The cutscenes were recorded at a low resolution, presumably to keep the file size down, and they were popular with some publications. Mr. Pagliarulo's AVOLT review again, quote, "While not as flashy as the full-motion video sequences of Jedi Knight, they are even more effective for 2 very important reasons. The first is that the player must use his or her imagination, remember that? To fill in the details of what the characters and environments really look like. Kyle Katarn can be anything I want him to be. So can Mara Jade. I don't have to accept that they look like second-rate actors wearing leftovers from the LucasArts prop department." End quote. Another from GameSpot, quote, "Throughout the game, you'll notice a number of new features and enhancements. For starters, the cheesy FMV sequences are gone. All of the in-between mission cinematics were rendered using the game's 3D engine. They're not spectacular, but they're fairly well done and are a lot better than Jedi Knight's FMV." End quote. The cutscenes were competently choreographed, which was no small feat since, as far as I can tell, they were done manually with bespoke animations. Incidentally, I read that the levels used to generate these cutscenes are still floating around and can be loaded up to watch these cutscenes inside the game engine. There was creative effort put into these cutscenes, no doubt. Whether they're enjoyable is a matter of taste, and my tastes, dear viewer, differ. I recall the first time I saw these cutscenes. It was like sitting in the passenger's seat during a high-speed car collision with no seatbelt. Cutscene resolution was lower than the native game resolution, even back in the day. The muddy character models were orders of magnitude worse thanks to heavy pixelation. I was shocked by what I saw. It's easier to look back on Sith's cutscenes with what I know now and appreciate what was created. Are the cutscenes better than Jedi Knight's FMV though? You're kidding, right? Where Jedi Knight blurred the line between Star Wars cinema and blazing gameplay, Sith severed the cinematic presentation, which brought the experience crashing down to video game terra firma. Gone with the expressive characters and larger-than-life settings. Jedi Knight had set a precedent. The genie was well and truly out of the bottle. I might be among the minority, and I don't give a shit, but I sorely miss the full-motion video cutscenes. I even believe that their absence devalued Sith's pedigree a touch as a LucasArts production. Now that I've ripped the band-aid off and people are furiously clacking out hateful comments, we can start on the plot. Mysteries of the Sith begins 5 years after Jarek's defeat at the Valley of the Jedi. Kyle and his epic Samson beard now aid the rebels. A smuggler called Mara Jade seeks him out to retrain her in the ways of the Jedi. So far, so plausible. The story begins with Mara and Kyle training in a rebel base when it falls under attack. 2 Imperial asteroids pummel the base from orbit, so with a thrilling sense of urgency, Kyle commandeers one of their shuttles and heads up with a cease and desist. At some point while exploding both asteroids, and despite the absence of a cutscene, voice line, or text notification, Kyle happens to find information about a mysterious Sith temple on the planet Drummond Kaas. With little more info than that, he decides it's a great idea to go find it. Alone. His parting words to Mara are that he's taught her everything he can.
You've learned all you can from me.
When players assume control of Mara, she has level 1 force jump, seeing, and pull. You might be thinking what I'm thinking. Let's look at this from a narrative perspective. If we take Kyle's word at face value, that means he knows little more than rudimentary force powers. Clearly not true. If we read between the lines, he's a selfish prick for blowing Mara off. I don't believe that either, so why say that he's taught Mara everything he can? It's horribly cliché and doesn't convey the proper meaning of his departure. Kyle flies off, and Mara is shoved into the spotlight. Mara Jade was the brainchild of writer Timothy Zahn and his Thrawn trilogy of novels. Mara's fiery temperament and mysterious past made her an instant hit with fans, and she's been lurking in the shroud ever since. Mara's voice talent, Heidi Shannon, does an amazing job of teasing her personality onto the screen. Mara's sardonic wit is fully intact, equally at home providing light-hearted commentary or scathing indictment.
We detected 2 asteroids approaching our atmosphere and thought they'd break up on contact. We became alarmed when they took up a geosynchronous orbit and began bombarding our shields. They appear to be some sort of new Imperial weapons, disguised as asteroids to take us by surprise.
Looks like they were successful.
It's not something you typically see in an asteroid.
Mara Jade is what a well-written female protagonist looks like in Star Wars. She's tough, capable, witty, likable, yet troubled by her past and uncertain how she fits into the future. It must have taken an immense humbling force of will to seek another Jedi's help, especially since she was formerly Palpatine's assassin. Mara is fiercely independent and beholden to no one, but realizes that she can't fight the galaxy alone. This potential isn't fleshed out in Sith by half, but the personality is there and it carries the game a long way. A measure of growth and redemption is at the heart of Mara's story in Mysteries of the Sith, culminating in an unlikely role reversal. Mara's destiny is locked to the light side, despite the player-chosen powers. Killing innocents depletes Mara's force power, but flexible morality isn't the focus of this story. You'd be forgiven for not knowing what the focus is for most of the game though. More on that shortly. The moment the spotlight shifts to Mara, she's sent on errands for the Republic. These are fine, but not a single mission of the 3 which take the majority of airtime even faintly brush the plot. The inciting incident is Kyle's discovery of information about a mysterious Sith temple. Intriguing story, tell me more. Instead of kickstarting the plot, however, this information is ignored by the protagonist for ages. There are 10 levels where players control Mara. 7 have nothing to do with the plot. Over 2/3 of Mara's levels. They don't even build on Mara's character. This is poor storytelling. Let's review the title. Mysteries of the Sith. Where are my mysteries of the Sith? Why is Mara hopscotching around the galaxy for stuff that isn't related to the titular premise? We spend time with Mara and guide her through the trials of being a rebel agent, but none of the missions make commentary on the nature of being a Jedi. And there's no hint of Sith in the mundane activities she's sent to perform. The Jedi holocron in particular could have been an opportunity to spark something, yet bafflingly it's nothing more than an unrelated MacGuffin. What we're really shown for most of the game is Mara the Smuggler, not Mara the Jedi. None of the rebel missions test Mara's Jedi talent in a meaningful way, and the crucible of the plot lies cold until the final 3 levels. Conversely, each level in Jedi Knight brought Kyle closer to his goal, and while that goal changed, it was clear what his objectives and motivations were. Even levels which didn't have a direct impact on characters or plot still tracked Kyle's progression toward the next objective. Mara lacks agency. There's no reason to her actions through the guts of the game. This might have been easy to overlook if there were Dark Jedi to test her mettle, but those are absent too. I can't hold this against the developers though, their hands were tied with licensing tape. But to see Sith stumble in this area is painful. The plot eventually shakes its senility when Mara notices that Kyle's been gone a while and decides to check on him. She realizes the gravity of the situation when she finds Kyle's abandoned ship. Her normally light tone grows serious, indicating to the player that these narrative beats are now important to the character and that they should pay attention. It's the sort of characterization that Marvel has failed at for longer than I can recall. Levity is a scalpel, not a chainsaw. Mara is confronted by an apparition of herself, a dark reflection violently wrenched into being by morose thoughts. Dark Mara is past, present, and future, a malevolent cycle of turmoil and impulse. Dark Mara is Luke's Vader on Dagobah, a reminder that the greatest and purest darkness lies within, and that we are the obstacles to personal growth. Mara chases Kyle into the restless, screaming heart of the Sith temple while assailed by creatures, undead Sith lords, and Kyle himself. Kyle tempts her with power, but Mara never loses sight of her reason for coming to such a spiritually repulsive place, holding fast to her conviction. I'm disappointed that Mara isn't tempted in a more tangible way. She harbors a deep hatred for Luke Skywalker as the one that got away. Luke was her final target when she was Emperor Palpatine's assassin, the Emperor's Hand as she was known. Palpatine's death sucked the life from her cause, and she resented Luke for a long time. She was in Jabba's throne room during Return of the Jedi, disguised as a dancer. She begged Jabba to let her come on the trip to the Sarlacc pit, recognized it as her last opportunity to kill Luke, but Jabba denied her request. Her resentment festered well after the Emperor's death. This isn't my storytelling, it's canon in the EU novels. Mara is a layered character. Another shot at Luke would have been a very tempting lure. The developers were under strict direction about the characters they could use, so Luke's omission isn't overly surprising, but it's a more fitting temptation than offers of power or a duel with her dark self. Mara eventually confronts Kyle in a void. Kyle seems to hold mastery over this place and beckons her to step forward and join him, or reject his offer and step into oblivion. There's one correct answer to this test of faith, but I love how it crashes against the player's self-preservation. It's just a video game. What's the harm in taking the visible path in front of me? Perhaps it's the right path. Sweet seductive lies. The jousts with Kyle are more than confrontation. They're a probing of weakness, a study of vulnerability, an admission of guilt. Mara has a checkered past. If anyone could succumb to Sith teachings, then it's surely the former Emperor's Hand. Kyle knows this and acts as her inner monologue, pulling at the threads of biting darkness within. The devs could have done more with this, so much more. If Jedi Knight let storytelling inform gameplay, then Sith did the polar opposite. The devs could have done more, but they did enough. It goes without saying that this analysis includes spoilers. I'll still get the odd comment about spoiling stuff, no matter how many warnings or clarifications I make. I tried. I encourage you to try Mysteries of the Sith, and if you do, I also encourage you to skip the final fight spoiler which I talk about next. Use the timestamp in the description. It's a bold and clever ending, and if you've liked what you've heard about Sith so far, I know that you'll appreciate it. Okay, here we go. Mara's final fight with Kyle is one of the more satisfying and clever endings that I've seen. Kyle forces her to fight, and fight they do. If the player lacks force heal, she'll fight until her resources are spent and her health is gone. She'll give it her all, and it still won't be enough. It was never meant to be. The fight doesn't end with a fallen Jedi. It ends with the faith in compassion, the immutable bond of true friendship, the sheathed blade. Literally. The game ends when the player realizes that Kyle's redemption isn't in her hands, but his. Only he can choose to return to the light. And so, the player sheathes their lightsaber. Kyle pulls back for a killing strike, but can't bring himself to do it. The player wins by choosing not to fight. It's a powerful moment, which may leave some feeling cheated, but it's the perfect Jedi ending and recontextualizes Mara's actions throughout the game. Jedi are taught that peace is the answer, not violence. Reconciliation and redemption are the beating heart of the Jedi philosophy, for how can long-standing conflict be harmonious? Resentment and bitterness build over time. Hatred is a conscious choice. It's warm and energizing and empowering, and these feelings eclipse its corrupting and self-destructive nature. Mara fought her demons and won. Her training is complete. This was a bold choice of ending for 1998, when shooters showcased tough boss battles and mayhem. Sith's restraint is apt. It's the perfect cap to Mara's training, and my only misgiving is that this theme of restraint isn't more prevalent throughout the game. Something which never sat right with me is the ease with which Kyle slips back to the dark side. His sudden lapse doesn't make sense. The canonical ending of Jedi Knight has Kyle triumph over his anger and defeat Jarek to become a card-carrying Jedi Knight. He's travelled this arc before. And yes, people can and do slip backward, but this feels too convenient. I get that the devs had to work Kyle in somehow, but this wasn't the best foot forward. Rather than tackle this as an individual problem, let's look at how the plot and characters could have been strengthened. First, and perhaps controversially, let me know, Kyle should have been an unplayable supporting character. We spend 4 levels as Kyle, which is over a quarter of the adventure. This is Mara's story, and she deserved complete focus. Some might argue that this is still Kyle's story, seen from a different point of view, but that point of view is absent during Kyle's fall, and that lack of context makes it impossible to empathize with Kyle's unknowable internal struggle. What is the nature of this darkness which now inflicts him? From where does it stem? Second, the plot shouldn't have evaporated in the middle of the game. Sith makes an effort to tell a story, and dropping the plot to chase adventure was a baffling choice with no payoff. For 7 levels, the player is asking where these missions lead and how they affect the plot. They lead nowhere and affect nothing. They don't contribute to the plot, the lore, or Mara's growth. The player character mechanically improves, but that isn't necessary for the plot because none of these improvements have narrative impact on Mara or the final outcome. This could have been fixed by the next point. Third, there should have been greater focus on the mysteries of the Sith. It makes no sense to have Mara run busywork when the player understands that Kyle's visit to a Sith temple alone is an omen. Instead of Kyle revealing where he went, he could have been cagey about telling Mara what he found, leading to her suspicion that Kyle was getting himself in over his head. The story could have focused on tracking Kyle to Drummond Cass and finding ever more disturbing information about his destination and what awaited him. This not only keeps the plot ticking along, but builds upon the foreboding mystery of Kyle's disappearance. We know that Mara will follow him and inevitably put herself in danger, leading to an unknown but clearly volatile situation. The stakes escalate and players are hooked into the outcome. How did the Imperials find out about the Sith Temple? What did they plan to do with the information? Is anyone else hunting the temple's location? Who used to reside at the Sith Temple, and why is it important to visit? None of these threads are explored, and they could have been, quite easily. Finally, the temple could have incapacitated or imprisoned Kyle instead of turning him to the dark side, like threatening to fingersnap pizza from existence if he left. A truly terrible fate. The extended universe has its share of powerful Sith spirits, capable of reaching beyond the veil to affect the living. We could still have the final fight, this time with the understanding that Kyle was fighting against his will, or rather, for control of it. This explains the strange relapse Kyle suffers without compromising his redemption from Jedi Knight. Any of these beats could have resulted in a focused Sith mystery which spurred a greater reliance on Force powers and built a satisfying plot. To be fair to the devs and writers, I wouldn't be surprised if similar ideas were broached and shut down by LucasArts licensing. Their Force grip on lore likely choked much of the expression from whatever original ideas the team had. I'm not disappointed with the devs, I'm disappointed that things weren't different. Who knows, perhaps then this game might have had the widespread recognition that it still deserves. A final point about the story. The voice actors' names are missing in the end credits. Come on guys, it's no mystery who voiced these characters. Acknowledge the people who do the work. Mysteries of the Sith was a bold creative direction for a bold creative team. While working under the hovering palm of Lucasfilm licensing, the development team crammed enough fan service into the game to make any Star Wars fan blush with pride. Masterful use of the Jedi engine allowed the developers to craft stunning locations and set pieces on a time and financial budget that would crush many teams, like a plastic beer cup against the forehead of a high school jock. Sith's tiered Force powers were a clear upgrade from Jedi Knight's freeform approach, which gave the game added depth and replayability. The periodic auto-purchase of Force powers allowed the developers to include Force puzzles with the confidence that players were equipped to handle them. It's an angle that I wish future Jedi titles had taken and expanded upon. Sith is a love letter to the expanded Star Wars universe of the 90s. It's an expansion by fans, for fans, with esoteric content which can still be appreciated on its own merits. You don't need to know who Mara Jade, Talon Card, or even Kyle Katarn are to enjoy what's offered. Tight gunplay, empowering Jedi antics, and creative level design define the Sith experience. Coloured lighting was tastefully applied to enhance the setting, and the sense of grand adventure was front and centre. The climax must be played to be appreciated. Expansion packs weren't like the fluff weapon and skin DLC of today. They were serious investments of time, energy, and creative input, and Mysteries of the Sith represents the upper end of value for money with this model. There were no recycled levels, there were new assets and weapons, the Force system was overhauled, and there were groundbreaking multiplayer options and 15 maps to enjoy them on. Sith is 80% a new and complete game with its own identity. How many expansions or DLC can boast as much? And the team did it in 10 months. Sith isn't perfect. Its difficulty pacing needed revision, and they could have incorporated more mandatory powers into puzzle solving. The story should have focused exclusively on Mara, but that's just my opinion. The plot vanishes for a long time and fails to connect Mara's adventures in any way, but the characters, setting, and struggles are all evocatively and satisfyingly Star Wars, and that's what matters. More development time could have given greater balance and polish to these elements and smoothed the deeper wrinkles. We can only dream about what the final game might have looked like if that was so. Games are political, and it would be irresponsible of me to gloss over the clear political statement made by Mysteries of the Sith. Kyle's crystal envy for a purple lightsaber is obvious from the opening cutscene. His eyes linger a little too fondly on its deep, mesmerizing hue. Kyle's yellow lightsaber is a hand-me-down, and he resents this keenly. To him, a yellow lightsaber is a reminder of inferiority, and this affects him so deeply that he's forced to flee to a crappy backwater planet. Meanwhile, Mara is starstruck by the grey-brown grandeur of Kyle's gorgeous beard. Its luscious curls and tasteful style are so perfect that its mere presence is painful. Mara is almost thankful when Kyle disappears, but she soon learns that the beard has been a source of inspiration and power for her follically challenged features. She seeks Kyle and his gorgeous beard to admit her envy and make amends. Kyle is reluctant because he knows that he can never own that wonderful purple lightsaber, but finally agrees to set his own envy aside. Once they finally meet and find common ground, they realize that they have much to be thankful for with their own lightsaber crystals and facial hair, or lack thereof. A message that we can all learn from. But really, the true subtext of the plot is that Kyle's beard is awesome. I have fond memories of Mysteries of the Sith. The anxious anticipation of when my friend and I could continue Mara's adventure is something I'll never forget, from a time when the mystery was well and truly alive. Mysteries of the Sith is often overlooked in the Jedi series of games, yet was no less important in the development of the Jedi formula. I've stated my case for its place among the 90s pioneers. Perhaps you agree, perhaps you don't. Drop into the comments and tell me what you think of Mysteries of the Sith. Was I on the money? Did I miss something? This is the conversation, and there is no conversation without you. This might seem like an odd section to include in an analysis video, but it's appropriate given the impact which Jedi Knight had on me. Jason Court brought a strength of character to the role of Kyle Katarn, which struck me immediately when I watched those live-action cutscenes. He had an on-screen presence which was as bold as it was strong, as masculine and stoic as it was fragile. Court's real emotion during the Maw cutscene is undoubtedly what sold it. Kyle could have been a one-tone hero, a badass who kicked ass and had no time for the feminine feels. Court changed that perception. Court made Kyle human. He wasn't just a cocksure rebel with a killer to find. He was a flawed and emotionally charged human being, a guy driven to the precipice by his own vengeance. Kyle Katarn was compromised, vulnerable, and struggled to move on from his father's death. Kyle's struggle with anger was something I could relate to. He was someone I could empathize with, and it was thanks to Jason Court. In an interview by a website called Star Wars Interviews on March 2010, Jason admitted that he hadn't kept up with the Kyle Katarn character over the years, which is understandable. He was never an involved Star Wars fan, and I get the impression from Jason's hustle that he was a gig actor, jumping between sets to keep the lights on and to stop the ribs from meeting the spine. Immediately moving on to the next film set wasn't a dismissal, it was part of the grind. I think it's fair to say that Jason never saw the impact his portrayal of Kyle Katarn had on fans. His swarthy image became Kyle Katarn, and the character never felt right in future games with a different voice actor. Jason made Kyle his own, and that's something I doubt will ever be replaced. Ironically, Jason doesn't believe that he left a legacy behind with his portrayal of Kyle. If you feel the same way I do, drop into the comments and tell him how wrong he is. Jason would only stay in acting a few years after his Jedi Knight gig before, famously, in the Star Wars community, leaving to chase his passion for making wine. He now runs a winery called Evidence Wines. If you're in the region and like wine, check it out. Be respectful and please don't bombard him with Star Wars lore. He loves winecraft and adventure, so talk about that instead. I enjoy a nice red on occasion, and if I were in the area, I'd pay the winery a visit. Based on everything I've read about Jason, he sounds like a chill guy to shoot the breeze with. He looks like the dude, for Christ's sake. What's not to like? I'm across the globe, so this is but a quaint dream, but perhaps you, dear viewer, are close enough to make this a reality. If you are, I envy you. This section is a tribute and my way of saying thanks. So, Jason Court, if you ever stumble across this video and manage to watch this far, thank you. Thank you for turning Kyle Katarn into a Star Wars icon which many fans have fallen in love with. You are, and always will be, the face and voice of Kyle in my eyes. Thank you for endearing Kyle and yourself in our hearts, for elevating Kyle from a simple Star Wars character into something personal and resonant. Even though the corporate galaxy far, far away has moved on, Kyle's fanbase continues to grow. A simple acting gig in the mid-90s immortalized you in Star Wars lore. It's your likeness which is canonically Kyle Katarn. Jason Court, thank you. The reason that games like Jedi Knight and Mysteries of the Sith remain iconic is the same reason they remain important. No one designs games like this anymore. I don't mean replicating the formula to a T, I mean the boldness to let players wander, the willingness to diverge from accepted norms, and a keen understanding of why the source material is popular. Both games strained at the limits of design to create huge, sprawling levels which challenged player perception as much as ability. It was awe-inspiring then, and is still impressive now, particularly when held up against its peers from the time, and even contemporary retro shooters. Force powers and open levels created a virtual Jedi playground for players to mess around in, and the lightsaber had surprising utility for a first iteration. Hell, it was damn cool to finally see a lightsaber in a first-person shooter. Jedi Knight and Mysteries of the Sith were more than the first Jedi games. At the heart of both experiences is Star Wars. Not gaming, not pushing boundaries, not even telling a formulaic story. Just Star Wars. Love for this franchise is the glue that binds the components. It's felt in level design, the characters, and the freedom of player expression. The developers wanted to craft an experience that players actively engaged in, not rushed through. Their vision was clear, and they executed their plan to great success. Their eye for three-dimensional space and the architectural experience among the team made for memorable locations which grounded the setting, even when it appeared that Kyle deliberately took the most dangerous routes. That's the best way to experience Star Wars, inside an industrial fuel tank with blaster fire ricocheting off the walls. Jedi games could have began life moving in a different direction. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, was a top-down third-person action-adventure game which failed to capture the feel of being a Jedi Knight. The long third-person perspective was impersonal, the force powers felt impotent, and the lightsaber was a shallow mechanic with limited use. This could have been the introduction to lightsabers and force powers in 3D gaming. Given its mixed reception, how likely would a publisher be willing to splash on similar titles? Do you think? Jedi Knight and Mysteries of the Sith planted a strong foot forward, and the Jedi games which followed owe a great deal to the success of these pioneers. That alone is worthy of the Hall of Fame. The debate rages about fan input for video games. Some will snub-nose any and all fan input as unqualified and irrelevant. This is obviously wrong, as proven by the passionate developers who worked on these games and were close to the source material. Jedi Knight and Mysteries of the Sith wouldn't have enjoyed the attention to detail and care in their world building if it weren't for the fiercely devout Star Wars fans among the dev team. Would there be the same likelihood of success from people who hated the franchise? Toss a coin to your Witcher. Developers are fans too. But that is not enough! What about amateur mappers and modders? They may not be formally qualified, yet they extend the life of games decades after release. These projects bring fresh eyes to the franchise, as is the case with Repertal's Jedi Knight remake. Jedi Knight is relevant again thanks to the remake, and I love to see it. What about the average fan then, the one who tweets and posts and is involved in the conversation? What about the fans who create art or write fan fiction? Do their opinions not matter? This might be a controversial opinion to some, but I believe that all constructive fan input has merit. This quote from author Neil Gaiman springs to mind. Quote, "When people tell you something's wrong or doesn't work for them, they are almost always right. When they tell you exactly what they think is wrong and how to fix it, they are almost always wrong." End quote. My point is simple. Humans are wired to find inconsistencies in logic, design, and aesthetic. When something doesn't feel right, it's because we've noticed something which doesn't work but lack the tools to describe what and why. In some cases, we lack the ability to notice these inconsistencies at all, which is another point of friction. Gamers who aren't developers might lack the tools to analyze a problem, but they can still sense a problem when they happen upon it. Part of the reason we have massive cultural divides at present is because of the individual inability to accept that alternate viewpoints may have merit, cutting off the nose to spite the face, as the old saying goes. It's also worth remembering that professional creatives may not be as big a fan as their audience. Put concisely, the fans might know the source material better. Finally, franchises don't exist without passionate fans. Period. I'm straight off topic again, but this has been an annoyance of mine for some time and it needed to come out. Jedi Knight is the perfect case in point to highlight how absurd the anti-fan feedback argument is. Fans are the lifeblood of a franchise. They deserve a voice. Let's lighten the mood with a nice roundup from High Functioning Medium.
Yeah, man, that's Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 and Mysteries of the Sith for you. They were my first introduction to action games. They provided me many of the most foundational and fun multiplayer moments ever, and they're just an incredible marriage of original fun and faithful homage. I can't overstate how much I love them. Now, have they aged amazingly? Probably not, as I'll find out soon enough when I review them on my own channel, but I'll always have those memories, and my grip is far too tight on them for anyone to force it from my mind. And I hope one day you can try them out for yourself. May the Force be with you.
The Force is strong with this one. Thanks, mate. Jedi Knight and Mysteries of the Sith fired a hunger in gamers for more. They heralded a renaissance of sorts for Star Wars gaming and cemented Jedi Knight as a standalone brand, which continued to critical acclaim with Jedi Outcast and its revolutionary lightsaber mechanics. When you think of the Jedi gaming legacy, remember that it began here, and the Jedi Knight is your path to the ways of the Force. I hope you enjoyed this analysis, and if you didn't before, I hope you have a deeper appreciation for Jedi Knight and Mysteries of the Sith. I'll always have fond memories of these games, which surprisingly hold up to nostalgia in current day. They both deserve a place in anyone's library, and GOG makes this easy with its constant sales and DRM-free content. There are links in the description to Jedi Knight and Mysteries of the Sith if you'd like to add these games to your GOG library. There are also links for all the mods featured in this video. I recommend the remasters, they are very sexy. If you do go and check them out, tell them Blondie sent you. Seriously, name drop the channel, it helps a ton. A big thank you to High Functioning Medium for lending his experience to this video. I love hearing personal accounts, and Medium is a thought-provoking guy. Go watch more of his videos using the link in the description. Throw him a sub, help him grow. A fistful of thank yous to all my patrons who brought you this video. And as of this video, all patrons are listed in the credits. You're all amazing, and I'm thankful for your support. A concussive blast thank you to I'm Your Huckleberry supporter Nosh, who contributed during the creation of this video. Patron support means that my Force mana is always full and that I can continue preaching the godliness of Kyle's epic beard to the galaxy, until YouTube decides otherwise. Patrons can also access exclusive content like the script for this video and a complete secret guide for both games, as a way of saying thanks. If you'd like to see your name here or want to support the channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description, if and it pleases you. If you enjoyed this video, then chain lightning that like button, subscribe to the channel, and force push the Blondie experience out into the galactic expanse. Remember the cant. Sharing the video helps, believe me it does. Thank you kindly for watching.